What is color? Sorry, kind of a weird question, but imagine I set an object down in front of you and asked you to describe it. Like a sword. Well, generally you would list off a variety of descriptive terms which are bounded by a sort of binary structure. Is it hard or soft? Heavy or light? Sharp or dull? Pretty much every observable attribute will occupy a point along a binary range of properties, bounded by whatever like infinitely sharp or infinitely dull would be. Put enough of these descriptors together and bam, you've got an object. This implies that our physical reality has a sort of binary structure to its bounds, with everything existing somewhere within each independent attribute spectrum. You know, like a character creator menu, kinda. But color isn't like that. Color is a seemingly unbounded spectrum, or maybe we simply cannot comprehend its bounds. I mean, there's the color wheel, so we could establish that blue is the opposite of red, and maybe that aligns with the associated length of the light's wave, but what does that really mean when there are all these other colors in between? Tell me, do you ever feel a strange sadness as dusk falls? Asks the man sitting beside us. They say it's the only time when our world intersects with theirs. The only time we can feel the lingering regrets of spirits who have left our world. And the subtle expression he makes here, this mixture of humility and vulnerability and unspoken regret, communicates so much about his character. We then cut to Link sitting beside him, who appears much more closed off. We can't even see his eyes, as if to suggest that he is currently unable to connect with this man, to see what he sees. This question, as we'll come to see, is more than idle conversation. There's a dark, all-consuming conspiracy with centuries of bloody history which grips at the heart of this land, an inherent depression to the structure of reality. And the man asking this question is probing at Link's intuitive ability to perceive the incomprehensible. His name is Russell, by the way, and he acts as a sort of mentor to this incarnation of Link, which is interesting for reasons we'll touch on in a bit. Although they seem to be on different wavelengths at first, where they do connect is when he mentions a task for Link, who is immediately excited by the opportunity to journey outside their sleepy village. You have never been to Hyrule, right? He asks, and there's just so much intrigue to that little pause. As a sequel to Wind Waker, this one line probably caused all sorts of conspiracy and confusion. Isn't Hyrule buried beneath the waves? Is this a prequel? Did they end up reversing the flooding after all? As it turns out, actually, none of those things, but we'll come back to this. Russell and Link cross a bridge and lock the gate behind them, as a sweeping shot from below builds a subtle feeling of paranoia, implying some danger which lies beyond the divide of this dark chasm. Some unseen horror which is waiting, watching, yet held at bay for now. This gate seems decorated as if to ward off evil, and unlike in previous titles, the artificial boundaries constraining Link to the starting area of the game don't feel especially limiting or oppressive. In fact, there's almost a sense of relief to making it back safe to town. A man from town arrives looking flustered and calls out for Link. His name is Fado, and he runs a ranch in Ordon village, where Link works as a part-timer. It seems he's having some trouble wrangling the goats, so Link heads down to help, only to find that his horse is missing. But Link doesn't seem too worried, and I think this little hint from the camera also acts as an indication that he suspects where she is headed off to. And, so my first impression of the controls is that they feel awfully clunky and rigid, as Link seems to lurch from place to place. Compared to the Wind Waker, where control is very fluid and intuitive, Twilight Princess feels a bit uncomfortable to play, especially in combination with the low-angle, almost claustrophobic camera. But as we'll come to see once we get into combat, I actually think these design decisions were deliberate. Whereas Wind Waker was an empowering journey about exploring the world, I honestly think Twilight Princess is something more like a horror game. There's something macabre, almost grotesque about the presentation of this game. From the ominous lighting, to the narrow corridors, to the highly detailed and expressive character designs, with proportions that seem to be just grounded enough in reality to feel a bit uncanny. It has this sort of disorienting aesthetic of surrealist detail, and yet there's a real beauty and compelling honesty to its simple presentations of human connection. This is Ilia, Link's childhood friend, and as she bids us to play that song Epona likes through the grass, you might already be starting to connect the dots as to the ancestry of this iteration of Link. These little blades of grass are sort of the primary instrument of this game, while these and something else come later. And they indicate Link's connection to nature and his affinity for handling animals. Which is gonna come in handy because it's goat wrangling time. This is such a goofy start to the game, but it emphasizes an important point, I think. Link is an important figure in Ordon Village, not just a child. He has a job working at the ranch, is apprenticing under Russell, goes outside the village gates to the dangers of the wild to gather supplies. Along the series of 3D Zelda games, the various iterations of Link have been following a path of increasing maturity, each picking up where the last left off. Put together, we see a sort of meta-narrative tell the story of an isolated child with dreams of heroism who crashes up against the harsh truth of reality, rediscovers his purpose by reconnecting with home, and then develops his own style of heroism as he sets off to discover the world. Now we are introduced to a version of Link who appears fully mature, who works a job and helps to improve his community. These opening moments of the game establish a deliberate contrast between Link and the children of the village, who look up to and idolize him. So, not wanting to let them down, we head off to see if we can buy a slingshot from the general store. Thus begins a Zelda game tradition that I really like, the series of interconnected odd-job fetch quests that tangle you up in the bundled web of community that is Ordon Village. As we head into town, we see this man, Hanj, looking concerned about this massive bee's nest hanging overhead. He mentions that his wife, Zora, who runs the general store, has been upset ever since their cat ran away, and when we head off to the store, we find that, yup, she's too upset to sell us that slingshot. Thinking we could track down the cat with some freshly caught fish, we head off to grab the fishing rod that Colin, Russell's son, has made for us from his mother, Uli. When we speak with her, we find that she's looking for a cradle that was swept off down the river. Okay, so we head off to track that down, and as we do, this guy, Jaggle, calls out to us to reintroduce us to L targeting, and the dramatic return of the beloved Big Arrow, this time even bigger and arrowier. Okay, alright, we climb up there, and he introduces us to another type of grass, which can be used to summon a hawk and do Pokemon battles with these Beedrill and a Mankey to recover the cradle, and then we bring it back to Uli, follow her back home. To grab the fishing rod, catch the fish, the cat runs home, Sarah is pleased, we buy the slingshot, she gives us a bottle, and finally we use the bottle to grab some grubs, and actually nothing happens after the grubs. I'm not really sure why the quest line ends here, but okay, at least we got a bottle of grubs, I guess? I like these little sequences, how they endear you to the various goofy residents of the village, and as we complete these odd jobs, wrestling goats and playing with pets, we also learn a bit more about Link and his own personality. This version of Link is deeply connected to animals and nature. He's already developed a sort of style of navigating the world, and this is likely due to the fact that he's been mentored by Russell. Generally, the development of a particular style, regardless of the skill or pursuit, begins with mentorship and imitation. A monkey see, monkey do kind of situation. This is the journey Link began in the Wind Waker when he first donned the clothes of the hero, and under the mentorship of the King of Red Lions, he surpassed this previous mantle to become the Hero of Winds, graduating from imitation into awakening something unique and personal within himself. In Twilight Princess, Link has already reached the point where he has begun to mentor and inspire others, as we show off our spiffy sword play to the local kids with the wooden sword Russell left us, and it feels like a significant departure for the series. So far, these games have mostly been telling stories of coming of age and finding your place in the world. Twilight Princess jumps ahead past some of these ideas, introducing us to a hero who has already established himself within his local community. And that's because it has its sights set on a darker, more ambitious style of storytelling. In so doing, it answers the question of why grow up in the first place? Why do all this work to find your place and develop a style of interacting with the world? And as the local kids chase off after one of the monkeys, which has been causing trouble in town, inspired by Link's demonstration of swordplay, as we follow after them, moving further and further beyond the safe-guarded space of the village, filled with a growing sense of dread, an ominous answer bubbles to the surface. Because there's something out there. Something dark, sinister, incomprehensible. It dwells in the shadows and the darkest recesses of our minds, and only by picking up a sword and venturing into this abyss can we hope to stand against it, and to protect the people we care about. With this responsibility hanging on his shoulders and his sword in hand, Link and Epona jump yet another gate, journeying far beyond their sleepy village into the darkness of the unknown. Beyond the boundary, we find this cozy little lantern shop, where the shopkeep has a clever marketing scheme: give away the lantern, sell the oil. Pretty smart. I'm not entirely sure what it is, but this shop really sticks out in my mind. It's just like so unsettling for some reason. Horror is all about pacing, the flow of building and releasing tension, and when we jump the gate with Epona, we expected something dangerous and confrontational on the other side. This place feels quaint and cozy, but something in the atmosphere here is wrong. The music is disquieting, crashing against itself over and over as if something sinister is bubbling under the surface, and it creates this oppressive energy that really puts you on edge. I really do think that Twilight Princess is styled after a horror game, even if it isn't explicitly scary most of the time. Rather, it blends some conventional horror mechanics into the traditional Zelda formula to build an experience that's unsettling, slightly wrong, and off-putting. I love this sort of uncomfortable, slow build style of horror, where everything seems at once familiar but just a little bit wrong. The art style does a lot to elevate this sensation, but beyond that, even the environments are carefully crafted to instill a sense of uncanny disorientation through subtle gameplay moments. Like how, if you get curious and peek inside the shopkeeper's house, I mean, it's a video game after all, I gotta check for stuff, you know? You find it almost completely empty, with all the furniture and belongings shoved against the walls. It's just, ugh. Like, it seems inviting on the surface, but if you dig a little deeper, there's something unnatural here. This sensibility is reflected in the gameplay mechanics as well. Horror games often feature somewhat awkward control schemes. The Resident Evil games are pretty notorious for their tank-style movement, where the main character can't strafe from side to side, but only walk forwards and backwards and needs to pause to turn. This is done deliberately to create tension. The game isn't intended to be a power fantasy with fluid controls where you dominate your environment. Instead, the controls are intended to depower the player and make them more vulnerable to the horrors around them. Twilight Princess feels similarly clunky when you first begin playing, and I found it pretty off-putting towards the start of the game, but when I got into my first combat with a Deku Baba on the way towards this cave, it just kinda clicked. The way it reels back with an almost elastic tension as you bash it with your wooden sword before snapping and popping into a visceral green goo. It's grotesque and honestly kinda gripping. The combat in this game isn't intended to portray a cartoony battle with good humor and fluid sense of empowering flow. It's an awkward, clunky battle for survival. At our feet, we find a discarded wooden sword, the same one Talo used to wear in imitation of his hero Link, and it pushes us on into the darkness of the cave ahead. The lantern acts as a time source of light for us to navigate the dark, claustrophobic environment, jingling with each step like a bell or collar, while we bat away creatures that jump out from the inky darkness. You know, like the sort of battery flashlight mechanics you see in most horror games. The purpose of this mechanic is to give us a fleeting control over the surrounding darkness, while instilling a lingering awareness of the inevitable moment where that control will be torn away from us. Again, the gameplay inspires a particular feel that heightens the atmosphere. The earlier N64 Zelda games were certainly dark, and often dipped into elements of horror at times, but in its opening moments, Twilight Princess fully embraces this style of storytelling, and it helps to establish a strong sense of tension during these early stages of the game. When we emerge into Faron Woods proper, we're introduced to this game's version of a bokoblin. These guys take 4 hits to fall, and you really feel the impact behind each bash of your wooden sword. The controls, visuals, sound design, the rumble in the controller, it all combines in a complementary way to make the combat feel so visceral and bestial. Like you're really beating these guys to death in violent fashion. I know it's just a little thing, but compare the feel of this moment to a similar moment of bonking bokos with sticks in Wind Waker, and it becomes more clear what this game is trying to accomplish. The story it's trying to tell through player experience. This is a game you're meant to take seriously, and I think that's a big part of why it has such a mixed reception. If you engage with the game, play along with its somewhat arbitrary restrictions and awkward controls, I think Twilight Princess offers a unique and thought-provoking play on the Zelda formula. And in these early moments of the game, this aesthetic really shines, as it builds towards a shocking and transformative revelation. But if that experience doesn't resonate, if that illusion of growing dread falls apart, which it will eventually, because honestly Twilight Princess at the end of the day isn't really a horror game, and it never fully commits to being truly disturbing or hopeless, then it can feel like a bit of a clunky mess without much payoff. However, I think there is something even more fundamental to the heart of Twilight Princess that keeps it going, that permeates its design and represents a shifting philosophy in the presentation of the series. More than any other Zelda game, Twilight Princess is carried by the strength of its characters. Like this little birdie guy. Look at him, all official, running his own little shop. I'm gonna refill my lantern oil here now that I finished eating all of my grubs. Here you go, 20 rupees in the box. I love this little goofy morality test. Even if you just play it totally straight and put in the proper payment, just the idea of this little bird sitting out in a forest of monsters relying on the integrity of strangers, I don't know, it's just pretty cute. Alright, moving on, we find that Talo and the monkey here have both been captured by the bokoblins, who we quickly dispatch. I mean, it makes sense that one little monkey wouldn't be the sinister mastermind behind all this chaos, but as we rescue Talo and bring him back home, settling into the routine of our daily life once more, something about this resolution just seems kinda off. At least for me, the thought was lingering at the back of my mind that, yeah, bokoblins are a little creepy, but these are just normal Zelda enemies. Is there something else going on to justify this horrific atmosphere? This deliberate anticlimax sets up a subsequent reveal that weirdly reminds me a lot of Bloodborne. So while we herd some more goats and prepare for our trip to Hyrule, let's spin off on a bit of a tangent. The initial premise of Bloodborne is that a strange disease is turning the citizens of an old Victorian-era city into beasts. You are a hunter, a member of a secretive organization tasked with dispatching the victims of this illness, using a variety of arcane, horrific weapons such as saw blades and hammers, which implies a sort of mirrored bestial nature to the hunters themselves. It's funny, I feel like these games also have a pretty similar twist partway through, but we'll come to that in a minute. The combat of Twilight Princess captures a similar aesthetic of animalistic brutality, and there's something in this version of Link's personality, a sort of bestial strength, which sets him apart from his predecessors. And the question that arises for me then is, what exactly is the difference between a man and a beast? It's a timeless question which has been explored in cultural ideas like the werewolf or the duality of Jekyll and Hyde. because there's something unquantifiable, indescribable, that separates humans from pretty much all other animals. And understanding that spark, that spirit, has inspired artists and storytellers for as long as we've had the ability to even tell stories. I think for me, what defines it is the idea that animals exist in a state of perpetual twilight. If our world exists as a stacked layer cake of binary physical characteristics, what makes humans unique is our ability to perceive the full color of spectrum which exists between these polar opposites. To grow and learn and change our nature according to our own set of principles and moral ideas. A human, at least we think, has the ability to weigh decisions, to engage some sort of bizarre quantum mechanism deep inside, to collapse the universe around each inflection point of choice according to their own will. And this ties into the game's recurring motifs of mentorship. As Link rushes off to find Ilia, he acts as a mentor to the children of the village, protecting Colin from teasing and giving Talo his wooden sword, encouraging his own heroic spirit after the frightening events of the day before. And at last, we find our way to Ilia, who has taken Epona to the local spring to help in healing her foot. With a sudden shock, absolute chaos bursts through the protective gates. Ilia is shot and taken hostage alongside Colin, while this strange creature blows a horn to summon forth a bizarre portal overhead. Link awakens later to find his friends gone and chases off in blind pursuit without a weapon or shield, spurred on by desperation and courage. And as he dashes along the bridge, crossing that valley of paranoia and death, he comes face to face with something bizarre. Something that shouldn't exist. A solid wall of shadow tinged by a glowing orange light. A hand reaches out to pull him across the threshold, belonging to this Lovecraftian creature with an incomprehensible biology, seeming to examine him with this massive carved structure of an eye. It's a fantastic moment, the horrific climax to this growing sense of dread, an inflection point of realization that the bestial horrors of the land pale in comparison to the arcane celestial terror of the unknowable eyes which have been watching you all along. The creature makes these strange, alien noises as the Triforce mark on Link's hand glows, pulsing with a sudden light that repels it. I just think there's something kind of badass about the idea that the light of the Triforce still has power here, in the face of cosmic, unknowable terror. And although it's never fully explained, I think the implication is that the protection of the Triforce is what causes Link to undergo this graphic transformation into the bestial form of a wolf, as if his human form is somehow incompatible with this realm. The bizarre creature, seemingly a bit defeated and unsure of what to do, drags us off while a mysterious figure watches from the distance. Link awakens in a stone cell chained to the floor, and as we acclimate to this new form and try to break free, that figure from before appears. She gives us a blank look before something sinister seems to occur to her, as she grins with a malicious smile. "I found you," she says. This is Midna, an impish creature of the twilight. Despite her small stature, she bears some similarities to the shadow beasts from earlier, wearing a stone mask covered in eye-like symbols. However, unlike them, only one of her eyes is covered by stone, implying a disparity to her nature which is reinforced by that color scheme of her design. With a taunting sneer, she goads us into obedience before casting some arcane spell to break the shackles and set us free, offering to make us a deal. If we can escape the cage, she'll tell us where we are. The tension of Link's relationship with Midna and the nature of her ulterior motive forms the emotional throughline of this game as she becomes her companion for the adventure to follow. Looking back at Link's previous companions, all of them have had competing interests for the most part. Navi wanted to please the Deku Tree, Tattle wanted to reunite with her brother, and the King of Red Lions most apparently was manipulating Link to guide him back into the ancient drama of Hyrule beneath the waves. However, there's something about the blatant intrigue of Midna that's especially compelling. She makes it obvious from the very beginning that her relationship with Link is transactional, that she wants something out of him and is willing to openly manipulate him in order to get it. Despite their competing motivations, I think Link's partners in previous games often represented a sense of internal conflict within his own psyche. Navi as a fairy, a pointer, and a guiding light represented a sort of heroic ideal. Her duty to the Deku Tree was a manifestation of Link's own desire to prove himself as a hero to the father figure in his life and establish himself as a true Kokiri. Tattle became a sort of cynical maturity as the correction to this heroic naivety, while the King of Red Lions constituted an oppositional force to Link's desire to discover his own style of heroism. With each step along the way, the companions have been becoming more individualized and independent actors within the story, but I think with Midna in particular, we see a true detachment of the metaphorical ideal of the guiding character and an evolution into a more authentic companion to Link. Their dynamic contrasts this version of Link's maturity with those of his predecessors, from games which focused on the struggles of coming of age and finding your own identity. This allows Twilight Princess, more than any other game so far, to truly focus on the drama between the individual characters and their own conflicting moral philosophies. At least, eventually it will be. For now, Midna just seems like a bit of a stinker, but what other choice do we really have? We dig our way out of the cell and slowly acclimate to our new form. As we poke around, Midna explains that Wolf Link has the ability to sense spirits. This is what becomes of those from the world of light who are pulled into the Twilight Realm. They seem unaware of what has happened, but in this spirit form, they are helpless prey to the demonic entities which inhabit this bizarre space. I like this idea that his animalistic form has some enhanced capability to sense spiritual activity, a sort of awareness which was blocked by his human sensibilities. I remember hearing as a little kid that animals could detect ghosts, like that when a dog barks at nothing, it's seeing something that we could not, or that if you look through a dog's ears, you would be able to see spirits. I mean, I think more likely my dog just like barking at walls, but there's an interesting idea here that reflects that sort of spiritual awareness or grace possessed by animals, like a squirrel knowing how to dart perfectly across branches or birds following migration patterns by instinct. It's like there's a missing step in how animals behave compared to humans. Some sort of reflection or tension or anxiety, and freeing yourself from this shackle could awaken a supernatural capability. Now, I really don't think Twilight Princess is always 100% consistent with its own metaphysical mechanics, or whatever you'd call them, especially once you factor in the timeline nonsense connecting this game to all the others, but the idea of a Twilight Realm is really interesting to me, so I wanted to do some digging and understand how it actually works. And man, Zelda lore theory goes so deep, you probably get a degree in it. The best I can understand it, the world we normally inhabit throughout the games is the Light World, which was created by the three golden goddesses who eventually created the Triforce, as explained by the Deku Tree. They left the world of light for the Sacred Realm, which is where Link was trapped in Ocarina of Time, which is kind of a spiritual, heaven-y kind of place, which is defined by its moral character. So it can either be good or bad depending on how the Triforce is used. This is, I guess, a kind of philosophical observation that the morality of our actions, manifested from our willpower, exists in a higher realm beyond the physical and is shaped by our own decisions. In A Link to the Past, the Sacred Realm was a sort of parallel Hyrule, but I don't think that was intended to be the case in the 3D Zelda games. The Sacred Realm seems to not really have much of a physical structure in these games. It's more of an abstract realm of thought. In Twilight Princess, as best I can understand it, the Twilight Realm is actually a parallel world, the opposite side of the coin to the world of light, with a structure that seems to resemble the shadows or inverses of the more intentional design of Hyrule. The world of light is a world of disparity and difference, which cycles back and forth like a pendulum, while the realm of Twilight is locked in a constant state of simultaneously existing extremes. I love this idea that the opposite of disparity is twilight, contradiction and paradox. In the world of light, in the brief moment of transition between two extremes, like when the sun sets, these two realms cross over, and the lingering emotions of the realm of shadows, the intentions of those spirits which cross the boundary from the world of light, can be felt. In this way, the three realms form a sort of triangle, with the sacred realm above and the realms of twilight and light forming a duality beneath, inhabited by people and their spirits. As we clamber across this underground waterway, we slowly realize that this is Hyrule Castle, and it appears to be the epicenter of the twilight which has been spreading all across Hyrule. There's some disagreement as to whether or not this is actually the Twilight Realm or some derivative of it that exists separately. I guess my take would be that these are areas of overlap between the world of light and twilight, similar to those brief moments of dusk Russell mentioned at the start of the game, where the barrier is weakened and shadow bleeds over, allowing the creatures of twilight to prey freely upon those in the world of light. With Midna's help, we leap up this tower and find our way to the roof, where the sky is glowing with a beautiful, ominous orange beneath a cloud of dusk. We dart across rooftops, guided by Midna with an animal instinct, tearing shadow birds out of the sky with a predatory intensity that mirrors Link's punchy and brutalistic swordplay, before finally making it up to the tower. And there we find ourselves in the presence of a mysterious cloaked figure who Link initially mistrusts until she turns to face us. Midna's eye roll here is great. Her snarky personality and sarcastic remarks make her a great foil for Link, but it also implies on a deeper level that she expected these two to have some sort of important connection. The figure reveals herself to be Princess Zelda, and over the course of their conversation, we discover that she has met Midna before. This dynamic sort of mirrors the one-sided conversation Link listened in on between the King of Red Lions and Jabun, as it seems quite a bit is going on behind the scenes beyond our awareness. But in contrast with the Wind Waker, here Midna thinks of Link and asks Zelda to fill him in on all that has happened. She also gives us a real snazzy title drop, which is pretty neat, I guess. Wait, why isn't Zelda an animal too? Or like a spirit? Okay, sorry, I'm listening. Yeah, Power of the Gods, King of Twilight. World of Shadows, okay. In a flashback, we're transported back to the moment the invasion first took place, when shadow beasts stormed the throne room and easily dispatched of the guards. Wait, how are they existing outside the Twilight Realm? Okay, sorry. The King of Twilight appears with two fancy shadow beasts wearing masks, depicting a double helix reaching up toward a unified circle, a fitting sort of ideal for beasts which dwell in extremity, who challenge the disparity and conflicted hearts of man. The King of Shadows wears a mask resembling a chameleon with a coiled tongue, and with a sneer he mocks the duality of this realm by offering the people of Hyrule a choice, life or death. And like, holy moly, is this not Ganondorf this time? That's pretty unique and also interesting. I wonder what's up with that. Sorry. I like the design choice of his helmet. I think the chameleon aesthetic was fitting because in addition to being eerie and unnerving, it gives him two big eyes on either side of his head. The people of Hyrule have two eyes facing forward, which gives them the perceptive, symbolic ability to blend together perspective. The shadow creatures have one large stone eye representing their ability to see without seeing, but having fallen to shadow, they can only perceive one aspect of duality. Midna has one real and one stone eye as a traveler and liaison between realms. It's cool. I don't know. I love this wacky philosophical meta nonsense. Anyway, as Zelda lays down her sword, the realm loses its guiding light and twilight begins to seep through the seam, transforming the people of the castle town into spirits. And now, all they know is fear. Fear of a nameless evil. Zelda reveals herself to be... Wait, she didn't do that yet? Okay, sorry, this is Zelda. Just like in the title of the game, oh my gosh. She reveals that the shadow beasts appear to be searching for Midna, who deflects the accusation with a shrug while turning her back. Feels like we have more questions now than before, but Zelda tells us that we should be leaving, as the guard will soon be making his rounds, while Link watches her with his goofy dog face. And wait, why would the guard even be able to see Link? The other ones couldn't, right? Because they were spirits. Wait, actually, why can't they see him? They can see the shadow beasts, can't they? Can they see Zelda? Shouldn't the guard be a spirit? Okay, sorry, I'm going. Let's get out of here. We reconvene with Midna on the roof, and she offers to make good on her end of the deal and lead us out of the twilight. But before that, she reminds us of something we may have forgotten. Just in case you were starting to trust her, she transforms into Ilia and Colin, imitating their expressions of terror with a sinister glee before offering another deal. I like the expression in Link's eyes here, the uncertainty in whether or not he's been betrayed or lied to. It shows that he isn't naive, that he worked with Midna willingly, if begrudgingly. Become my servant, she says, with the mouth of Ilia, apparently knowing where they are and how to find them, holding it over Link's head before returning him to the spring outside the twilight. Unfortunately, he's still in wolf mode. Don't look at me, I don't know how any of this stuff works. Midna's voice echoes tauntingly in our ears, seemingly from nowhere, as if we've been possessed by some demonic entity. Oh, never mind, she's right there. As a creature of Twilight, Midna can only appear as a shadow in this world, so I guess she's gonna hide out in ours. Sounds like she wants a sword and shield, and without her help we can't get back into the expanding Twilight Realm, so we head back to Ordon Village to find something that will suit her. There's an interesting dynamic of this moment, where Link returns to his friendly village in the warped form of a monster, compelled by Midna's dark influence, slinking around town to avoid frightening the people he loves and cares for. It's a grim moment of Kafka-esque body horror, to be attacked by the very people he had helped and protected earlier that day, to be seen as a vicious monster and even be forced to embrace that role, frightening them out of the way so he can proceed. And along the way, you get some assistance from the funny, friendly animals of the forest who can all talk to him now. I swear, the total whiplash in this game is absurd. And we're introduced to the main instrument of this game, the ability to howl. Generally, I think Link's instruments reflect some aspect of his personality, his longing for home, his desire to see the world, the fracturing of his identity, his sense of purpose. The howl of a wolf evokes images of the moon, of transformation and growth, but beyond that, wolves don't really howl at the moon, they howl to find one another, to reach out. There's a loneliness to the howl of a wolf, a desire for connection that foreshadows Link's own personal journey over the course of the game. Alright, so we grab the shield, then it's time for the sword, and we remember the blade we were supposed to deliver to Hyrule. I don't know if there's a word for this, if it's like a trope or not, but I really like the dynamic of an unassuming traveler intended to deliver some weapon as a gift to like the king or whatever, and then running into an unexpected catastrophe and breaking with decorum to use that ceremonial weapon to protect the people he cares about. I don't know why, it just feels so adventurous and like cool, I guess. Like awakening to some grander purpose, committing some small act of defiance in the purpose of a greater good. Anyway, that sword is kept in Russell's house, and he's out patrolling the town, apparently injured by a previous monster attack, so we have to sneak by to get inside. It's a sort of twist on a conventional stealth premise. In video games, you often have to sneak due to a fear of the enemy you're trying to avoid, which may or may not be compelling to the player who isn't actually in any danger. Here, the danger is more in the emotional recoil of being possibly attacked by your mentor or frightening his pregnant wife, and I found it a lot more compelling as a fail state. So at last, with the sword and shield in hand, or in paw, we head back to the Twilight. But as we go, a mysterious voice calls out to us from the spring. We chew on a shadow beast for a bit and free this extremely slow-talking fella, a spirit of light in the shape of a glowing ox named Ordona. Oh my gosh, dude. Okay, so the gist of it is that the goddesses left behind 4 spirits of light to protect Hyrule. The shadow beasts aim to steal that power of light from each protective guardian of the 4 different regions of the land, plunging that area into shadow and allowing the Twilight Realm to bleed over, the combination of which creates a sort of netherworld of true darkness. Fortunately, the shadow beasts are terrible at holding onto the light for some reason and keep dropping it on the floor, which means we can retrieve it. However, Ordona says that those transformed by Twilight usually cannot change back. Wait, was Link transformed by Twilight or the Triforce? Okay, I'm sorry, I'm asking too many questions. We gotta go to Faron Woods, find the other light spirit. Okay, I got it, bye, thanks for the help. We're pulled across the Twilight Barrier into the corrupted Faron Woods, having fallen to the creeping spread of shadow across the land. As we get our bearings, Midna messes around with the sword and shield we just retrieved, and we realize that these were clearly never actually meant for her. Seems she has more work for us to do, and I'm starting to feel like this deal isn't really tipped much in our favor. What a horrid little creature. Alright, well, here's the next Spirit of Light. In the Drape of Twilight, it appears to have lost its form. It gives us this vessel to collect the stolen light, which is the beginning of a symbolic sort of motif where light in Zelda games is given a physical manifestation in the form of fruits. In this game, some sort of berries or grapes. The light has been scattered across the region, held by the insects of darkness, which are the manifestation of dark in contact with the light. I think for a community of farmers and ranchers, this type of symbolism makes sense. Fruit and vegetables are grown in the light to create a way of life for the people. Pestilences, like plagues of insects, latch onto these sources of light, thriving in places of moral focus by stealing the efforts of others. This is one sort of dramatization of good and evil, with physical forms shaped by the particular perspectives of the people there to observe it. For a person like Link, it makes sense that these ethereal ideals would manifest in such a physical way. The bugs appear to be sparking with a pulsing electricity as they run, as if the light is incompatible with their nasty little gross bug bodies. What follows is like that moment where you don't want to deal with the spider, so you get your dog to do it, and then he goes up and eats it, and you're like, oh, I should have done that. The light returns to fill the little grapey things as tears, droplets of water. Eventually we drive off enough insects and collect enough water that our labor bears fruit, and the land becomes inhabitable again, reclaimed from the dark. It's kind of like a miniature version of taming the wilderness, relying on our bestial form to clear the way for humanity to flourish again. And in doing so, we revive Pharaon. What the heck is that thing? Seriously, what is this? Even the wiki doesn't have an answer. Is it like a squirrel scorpion? I think it's supposed to convey the hidden strength or courage of like a little woodland creature. You know, it also kind of looks like a bow, like the weapon bow. Anyway, we're jumping right back into Chosen One territory, and for the first time in this series, the game actually plays it totally straight. In Ocarina of Time, Link's perception of his Chosen One status was what landed him in hot water in the first place. In Majora's Mask, he didn't actually do anything heroic in his own body. And in Wind Waker, that wasn't even a reincarnation of the hero's spirit. I think he was just some random kid. I don't mind the more straightforward approach here, and the idea of being given magical squirrel clothes is amusing, like Piccolo's clothes beam. I don't know, it's okay. It borders on feeling a bit obnoxiously self-referential to me, like cashing in on some unearned appreciation the player will have for the history of these games, which is a pretty dramatic step back from the much more self-aware critique of idolization and hero worship we saw in The Wind Waker. His is the true power that slept within you reminds me of that awful line the King of Red Lions delivers to Tetra in his darkest moment, but in this case it's meant to be empowering. I mean, I guess I could see this another way, is Link not only being a servant to Midna, but also beholden to the destiny that lives within him, trapped by both the light and the twilight. But I don't really think that's what they were going for. And then she tells us our name, and like, yeah, I'm pretty sure he already knew that. His name's Link, but the idea that there's power in this name, and this legacy, and that by learning his true name for the first time his destiny awakens, I guess is indicated by the triumphant melody which plays. I don't know. I actually really like straightforward Chosen One style stories of heroism, but somehow it just doesn't really feel like the right fit for this game. Twilight Princess is the first game in the series where it feels like acknowledging the legacy of the preceding titles actually drags down the experience rather than elevating it, making it feel derivative or insubstantial at times. Although there is one self-referential moment coming up that I absolutely adore, so let's get going. Farron explains that a dark energy rests in the Forest Temple, a forbidden power which was locked away by the light, but one that might help us in defeating the King of Shadows. And with that, it's time to tackle our first temple. Turns out Midna was heading there too, and she implies our friends might be held there, which is just awful, since she pretty clearly knows they aren't, but whatever, let's go! At last, we have a true sword and shield, and we're on our quest, we're on the way. I love the attention to detail that went into all the little flourishes and stylizations of combat. Like the sharp slicing sound of drawing your blade, the little sword spins as you hold up your shield waiting for an opening, how you can hold your sword behind you as you run. I don't love how the game automatically shields for you when locked on, but I'm guessing that might have something to do with the limitations of the Wii controller and the desire to integrate some unique special moves, which are coming up, I'm gonna get to that in a sec. And when you sheathe your blade after dispatching some baddies, you do the coolest thing I've ever seen in any video game. Ever. We follow this little monkey as it banishes the poison fog now covering the woods, which seem to be some residual corruption remaining behind from the Cloak of Twilight, and already the theme of the dungeon is beginning to emerge. Protecting the monkey from monsters is a cute little moment of characterization for Link, even if it is pretty tedious. And after topping up on lantern oil, we bump into this golden wolf, who appears to be waiting for us, leaping as we approach to transport us to another realm. And this one probably is actually the Sacred Realm, where he transforms into an ancient skeletal warrior. He bids us to try to attack, easily parrying the blow and chastising us for lacking courage. But then he offers us to teach us his sword techniques, which must be passed down through his bloodline, connecting him as an ancestor to this version of Link. It's never explicitly stated in-game, but it's heavily implied that this is the spirit of Link from Ocarina of Time, which is just such a cool way to present the story. This little quiet implication tells so much while saying so little. Most interestingly to me, it confirms that Link did eventually make his way out of the Lost Woods at the end of Majora's Mask, that he found a place in the world, grew up, and eventually had children. It just makes me kind of happy to think that despite everything he went through as a kid, Link was still able to find his way out of the Lost Woods and make a life for himself. It's said that his spirit still lingers because of his regrets in not being able to pass down his skills, and he was never remembered as a hero, but he must have had some quiet, happy moments in the times between. I don't know, the ending to Majora's Mask had me kind of worried for the kid. And based on the ideas we're about to explore in this first dungeon, it's probably a fair bet that he ended up with Malon, the daughter of the ranch owner from Hyrule, and our version of Link is a direct descendant of their children. There are hints all throughout the opening moments of the game, from Link naming his horse Epona automatically on like the little text bubble screen, which I didn't show, whoops, but I didn't do it this time. I named my horse Epona in like every game, but in this one it does it for you. To how he could have learned Epona's song in the first place, to the fact that he works on a ranch. But even more than that, I think generally these first grass-themed temples tend to tell you something about the personality, ancestry, and ambition of each iteration of Link. So in Ocarina of Time, Link's journey was defined by the loss of his father and his confliction between wanting to fit in with the Kokiri against his desire to see the world and become a hero. This was reflected by the Deku Tree dungeon and with a more sinister undertone in the Forest Temple. In Majora's Mask, that longing for a lost father figure and the sense of being an outsider in disguise was reinforced to a neurotic, dreamlike anxiety by the events which took place at the Deku Palace. In Wind Waker, the grass dungeon reflected Link's unintentional capability to follow in the footsteps of heroism while defining his own unique style. And in Twilight Princess, the Forest Temple shows us Link's kindness and compassion towards animals, his understanding of nature, and by extension, his desire to protect the small farming community in which he grew up. It's a sort of sensibility and responsibility which feels like what Ocarina of Time Link spent his entire life searching for, and I like to think these early moments of Twilight Princess imply that he was able to find some sort of peace which is reflected in his ancestry and preserved through time in the Ordon community. So the basic premise here is that this bad monkey, with a very unfortunate weak spot, has stolen the Cyclone Boomerang and is using it to terrorize our monkey friend and all her buddies. He cuts the bridge to the central chamber of the temple, preventing us from proceeding, and so we need to find another way to get around. And it's a nice little dungeon. I like the integration of the flimsy, aging wooden architecture into the tangled roots of the giant trees which surround us, and the moments of visual relief where you step outside into the windy, cavernous ravine between chambers invoke some of that adventurous spirit from Wind Waker. In fact, once we slap around to the evil monkey and grab his boomerang, which houses a fairy of winds, this area really starts to feel like a deliberate passing of the torch from Wind Waker, which is kind of nice, I guess. We rescue monkey after monkey, solving puzzles along the way so that we can chain together enough of them, barrel of monkey style, to cross large gaps. As in previous games, most of the initial enemies we encounter are stationary threats which allow the player to slowly come to terms with the controls and disengage if needed. But I like the neat little twist of cutting these scary Deku Baba things, causing them to detach and crawl around on the ground after you. Everything here feels familiar, but painted with a sinister stylistic flair, like how the bomb flowers have become these creepy little insect things that turn into morph balls when hit. We solve a variety of bomb puzzles here, including a particularly devious one where you gotta jump the gap while still holding the bomb, which, like, actually maybe this is easy, I don't know, I might be dumb, but it took me forever to figure this out. I just figured Link would drop the bomb when he jumped with it, I don't know. We also use a lantern to burn away spider webs, which I guess is a tradition by now, and it's fine. At this point, I did start to feel a bit of fatigue with some of these Zelda-y tropes, and I kind of wish the lantern was used more in the way it was introduced, as a limited-time flashlight to help you in navigating the terrors of an all-encompassing darkness. Like, what is it with games and chickening out on dark-based mechanics? Looking at you, Dark Souls 2. I'm sorry, I didn't mean it. I love you. The wind-based puzzles are pretty simple, but I like the dynamic of Link gaining mastery over the cycle of the winds rather than being held at their whim. The manual targeting is a little clunky, But this item has some clever uses in combat, like flipping over enemies or pulling a bomb towards you, extending the range you get out of it before it explodes. The mini-boss is an extra scary Deku Baba, who gives us access to another monkey buddy, which we add to our growing collection. Midna shows a bit of a softer side here when she suggests we find the rest of them, and Link even makes a new friend. Yeah, you're welcome. Ooh. Together, the monkeys form a big chain, and like, yeah, this does not seem safe. Oh, okay, I guess it's fine. Boss time. The boss is a huge, extra scary Deku Baba. Okay, not super original, but I guess the implication is that exposure to shadow or twilight or whatever is causing the mutation of these creatures into increasingly horrific terrors. As if they're approaching some sort of apex manifestation of evil. Our reformed monkey buddy appears to provide bombs, which we deliver right into the side of the plant dragon guy's head, and then wail on its nasty eye uvula thing as the music soars triumphantly. It's not really an elegant transition to and from the background track, but I don't know, I found it pretty effective at escalating the excitement and dynamicism of the moment. It's kind of like a less subtle version of how Wind Waker would mold and shape the flow of music around the combat experience. And gosh, that sound of the sheathing sword gets me every time. Like, yeah, take that. This mysterious artifact descends, manifesting from the scattered shadows of the boss monster, seeming to glow with darkness. Midna quickly jumps up to get her grubby little hands on it, explaining that this is what she's been looking for. This is a fused shadow, and it contains some sort of unknown dark power. We'll need to find the other two with the other light spirits before she tells us what they do, so time to get to work. As we emerge from the forest temple, we're given a sort of final reflection on this section of the game. Leave the woods, says the Spirit of Light, telling us that the ones we seek are held in the region of Eldin. Link has discovered his true purpose, styled himself a hero, and now must venture out beyond the familiarity of the protective woods to rescue those he cares about. But there's a twist. Much of Hyrule is now held in Twilight, and if he steps inside, he will lose his heroic form and the empowering destiny that seemed to be giving us such momentum. This element of self-sacrifice and disempowerment builds a bit of anxiety that reignites some of that horror-inspired atmosphere, especially as Midna seems to revel in the awkward body horror of our situation. But still, Link gathers his spirit and heads out to face the world. And turns out it's right down the street. Nice. No, but really, when you do first step foot into Hyrule Field, the game does a good job to impress upon you the sense of scale here. Hyrule feels massive, bleak, and melancholic, as a giant swirling mass of twilight envelops the silhouette of the castle far in the distance, a constant reminder of the fading structure of the kingdom. There are some enemies and little hidden items in the overworld map here, but generally I think Hyrule Field is mostly meant to be passed through rather than actively explored, kind of like the ocean from Wind Waker. It gives a bit of breathing room between story moments with some enticing visuals to press upon you the scale of your journey. I've always had a bit of a soft spot for hub worlds, even really simple stuff like the castle in Mario 64 or Rosalina's Observatory. I just feel like they do so much to elevate the experience of a game beyond simply selecting a level from a menu. The Zelda series was arguably one of the first video games to recognize the significance of having connection zones between levels or dungeons and how it escalates a sense of exploration and adventure. So it does just end up being a short jog to reach the next province of the kingdom, which Midna actually comments on hilariously, and as she pulls us through the twilight, we're transformed back into Dog. Link picks up the scent of the missing village children, and Midna picks up an entire bridge somehow, and together the two of them track the kids to Kakariko Village, a dusty desert town located at the base of Death Mountain. I guess this must be the same Kakariko from Ocarina of Time, just changed after hundreds of years have passed. We quickly find the Spirit of Light and get our next set of grapes. Wait, should he really give us these? Aren't dogs not supposed to eat grapes or something? Whatever, now we gotta go find those bugs again. I quite like these little exploratory sections where Link needs to navigate an environment as a wolf. Without opposable thumbs, he is unable to open doors or easily pick things up, so he needs to navigate his environment more thoughtfully and carefully, looking for windows to crawl through or holes in roofs. Here we find the children under the protection of this man, Renato, a shaman and the chief of the village, who's trying to comfort them against their apparently doomed fate. But Colin expresses his belief in Link returning to save them, a moment of bravery for him that seems to even move Midna, as she comments on how sad it must be for you to keep toiling away like this beyond the notice of the very people you're trying to protect. And it's a nice little moment of empathy, as she recognizes Link's own tendency to worry about the well-being of others, which she quickly deflects by having you get back to work. There's an awkward sort of tension to these set pieces, which I partially really like. So I like how being in wolf form changes your perspective on navigating your environment and puzzle solving. It encourages you to really engage with the structure of these areas and look for alternative ways to get around given your limited moveset, like digging under walls or moving around crates. So like, for example, I dug my way into the inn to eat some bugs and I couldn't find a way out. So I was knocking over dressers, trying to light the curtains on fire. Like, you know, you leave your dog at home when you go out and he has a nervous breakdown. And the whole time you're doing this, you're forming like a little mental map of the area and saying like, oh, there's a chest under those stairs there. I'm going to come back here when I'm a human and I have hands and I can open it. And I think it's cool. The answer to this one was actually really obvious. You just have to go up the ledges. But I like exploring the environment in this way. But the problem is sometimes you can't really engage with the game like that. Sometimes the answer is just use the Midna jump to jump really good. And there's no real way to tell. I get that it's kind of a requirement for traversing some of these areas, and despite these little quibbles, I think these bug hunts elevate the experience of exploration, especially with the contrast of properly exploring these areas against once you've regained your human form. It can open all the doors and chests. The Spirit of Light here is this owl-butterfly hybrid kind of thing with a pattern of eyes lining its wings. It seems like the perfect fit for an all-seeing creature of wisdom, but I think this one is actually supposed to be representative of power. Like most of the second dungeons in Zelda games, the arc of this story represents a more traditional display of heroism following the spiritual awakening of the forest dungeon. Fittingly, it's here that Link saves the children of the village from the shadow beasts and recovers Epona from the Boblins. Boblins. Okay, sorry. All this action is punctuated by a tender moment where Link returns to Ordon village to tell everyone that the children are safe, and to pick up the dog again because he's such a good boy. It seems kind of like busy work on a surface level, but I think it's really important that the game slows down and allows Link to really see the relief on the parents' faces. Like Midna said, so far most of his heroic deeds have been done in another realm, hidden from sight or in the guise of a monster who was attacked by the villagers. Link isn't the kind of person to look for acknowledgement for his heroic deeds, so he has no desire to clarify what happened, but something about this moment here, where Uli mentioned how a monster stole the blade earlier, but she's relieved Link was able to recover it. It's a nice moment of clarity which grounds the impact of Link's heroism and his selfless nature. In a way, it also connects us more closely to the mysterious Skella guy, who comments that we have a bit more the look of a hero now. We learn the shield bash and then head over to the mayor's place to learn some sweet sumo moves too. He's excited to learn that the children are safe, although sadly Ilia is still missing. And wow, he's got hauntingly beautiful eyes. Sorry, man, you just fall into those things. Alright, next up, we're going to be climbing Death Mountain to clear the corruption mentioned by the Spirit of Light, but the Gorons and the people of Kakariko aren't exactly on good speaking terms at the moment. Gosh, everyone in this game has crazy nipples. Sorry, I'm focusing. Anyway, the only one who ever bested them in a feat of strength is the mayor, so we're here to pick up on his skills. After tossing him out of the ring a few times, it seems like we're starting to get the hang of it, but is this really the technique that allows him to beat the Gorons? Turns out there's one little secret he hasn't mentioned. Gosh, it's like finding out your favorite baseball player used a corked bat. Before we can return to Kakariko Village, the Bulblin King returns in a raid, snatching up Colin and summoning a veritable army of horsebacked enemies. Link gives chase on Epona with a frantic determination, spurred on by the desperate realization he had just reassured all the villagers of the children's safety. I remember when this game first came out, the horse-mounted combat was a pretty big feature in the marketing, and even if the novelty has worn off a bit since then, this moment is still very emotional and climactic and powerful. This version of Link is very strongly defined by his attachment to Epona, and the surging sense of power and capability he feels he slices through these enemies sells their relationship by communicating through gameplay. This all culminates in a final joust with the King Bulblin, where a last-minute dodge and a flash of the blade sends the fiend careening off into the abyss. Epona rears up as Link brandishes his sword against a backdrop of impending twilight, balanced on a bridge standing above the abyss, and this visual here just epitomizes Twilight Princess to me. There's actually a lot of bridge symbolism in this game, and I think here Link needs to prove his mastery of the space between, to find the courage to transcend the defined safety of duality on either side in order to rescue what is dear to him. Colin's bravery earns him the respect of the other children as he learns the importance of that strength which is conveyed by courage, which transcends the physical. And boy, I hope he's right about that, because here we go with the iron boots. This is better work, because in my mind I see this going more like when the cartoon character gets knocked out of his boots and there's like two little bones sticking up. Okay, no, we're good. We toss Gorons out of the way as we climb up the rickety platforms with Lion Death Mountain, and man, they're like all out to get you. Okay, well at least the guys down here in the hot spring are pretty chill. This is a bit of a random thought, but I love the sound Link's boots make when he walks across these metal platforms. It's so snappy and crisp. There's even a slightly different clinky sound when he moves across these chain link platforms. The attention to detail in the presentation of this game is pretty astonishing, even years later, and it creates a very interesting feel to the actual experience of playing the game. Wind Waker had a very simple presentation, and its controls felt fluid, precise, and carefully calibrated. Like Link was your avatar and you were directly controlling or inhabiting him. In Twilight Princess, everything feels a bit more stiff and rigid, and I don't necessarily mean that in a bad way. It's hard to put into words, but when I play this game, I don't really feel as much like I am Link as I'm controlling Link. Like I'm watching a movie of the events unfolding, and I'm doing my best to control him in a way that gives the best, presentation of the events happening on screen. I guess you might call this cinematic, right? I remember that being a pretty big buzzword around games at the time, and to me it really has to do with this sort of detached, low-down camera angle. I never really thought much about it, but in pretty much all the previous games, it feels like the camera was more of like an aerial over-the-shoulder perspective. I don't know, maybe it's like the field of view too. I don't know that much about cameras, but that slightly detached, eerie quality does fit the themes of this game pretty well, I think. Anyway, okay, we made it up to the Gorons. Well, I didn't say anything this time. Once we prove ourselves in the ring, we're granted access to the volcano and tasked with finding the other elders to piece together that key to the inner sanctum. Their patriarch, Tharbus, has been corrupted, likely out of exposure to the twilight, and been transformed into a horrific monster still deep within the mountain. His raging is seemingly tied to the increased volcanic activity, and by engaging with the culture of the Gorons and earning their trust, the chief is finally willing to put aside his pride to ask for our help. These are pretty standard beats for the second temple of these games, like Link learning to deliver ledgers with the Rito or literally becoming a Goron in Majora's Mask. It emphasizes Link's willingness to connect with others. Sure, he needs the fused shadow here, and the Gorons have been pretty unreasonable so far in dealing with outsiders, especially given the danger their actions have posed to the people of Kakariko Village. But still, Link chooses to earn their trust and learn from them rather than bend them to his own will. Oh, whoops. Jeez, dying in the lava is so graphic in this game. Okay, let's not do that again. Early on, most of the dangers in this dungeon are environmental, with some slow-moving slugs that get in the way as you complete some timing-based puzzles by activating switches with the iron boots. Seems pretty standard at first, but man, once this dungeon gets going, it really gets going. In the central atrium, we're teased about the upcoming danger of the Boblins, who appear to be also searching for something in the mines, while the more natural enemies begin to grow a bit more dangerous and the puzzles a little more involved. Here, we need to grab some chains to pull aside a heavy block, which gives a little foreshadowing for a skill we'll need later on. And time our release of this sliding mechanism with these periodic pillars of flame, which I didn't do an amazing job at because we gotta pull an Indiana Jones. Oh. I'm just imagining Link grabbing his hat from under the slowly closing stone door that just looks a little bit too much like styrofoam. Hey, actually, speaking of Link's hat, what's the deal with that little seam on the top of it? It's been driving me crazy this whole time, but I couldn't find a place to actually talk about it yet. Like, did it get cut off at some point and reattached? Was it just sewn that way as two separate pieces? Because, like, why would you do that? Aren't these magic clothes? Couldn't it just be summoned as one piece? Okay, sorry, I don't know. I'll stop getting distracted. In this run, the design of the grate encourages us to use the iron boots to sink below the surface of the water, calling to mind how they were used in Ocarina of Time to activate this pressure plate when suddenly some electromagnetic mechanism activates within the blue paneling overhead and pulls us onto the ceiling. This moment is just so cool. I honestly didn't think you could do anything more with the iron boots, but in general, this game manages to eke out pretty much every drop of gameplay creativity from all its different ideas. Clambering along a magnetic ceiling is natural and intuitive, and it was even foreshadowed by the same blue patterning on those devices we saw in the main atrium. Through the gameplay and environmental design, we even get a bit of world building. This is a mine, after all. The Gorons must have discovered this strange magnetic material lining the walls of their chambers and harvested some to use as cranes to transport construction materials when building over the lava. We've been down into mines before in many Zelda games, but these mines feel really carefully considered and precise in balancing the realism and believability of their design against making it a fun video gamey area to explore. Twilight Princess excels at presenting these sorts of robust, grounded, believable locations with a strong sense of purpose and place. And oh hey, it's our little buddy. Here you go, best bud in the house. Alright, so in this next room, when I ended up in a little combat scenario with a slug on the wall, standing at a 90-degree angle to the floor, something just clicked for me about this game. Like, of course this would be next. It's the most intuitive step in progression on this central idea. And yet it's so creative and interesting and surprising, and this thoughtful, intuitive design guides the entire flow of the rest of the dungeon. Soon we're navigating a maze on the ceiling, hovering over a room we passed through earlier. We know where we have to go based on our memory of the ground level, and this knowledge guides our exploration of these bounded magnetic areas above. It's so creative. And then after that, we're riding around in magnetic cranes, or leaping into the tractor beam from above, which this must be terrible on your ankles, running from spot to spot on this rotating bridge, and finally toggling the boots on and off to give us grip as needed while we do battle with the mini-boss. Zelda dungeons have a tendency to get a bit formulaic once the central item appears, because you know that it'll be used as the key to solve most of the rest of the puzzles and fight the boss, even if it doesn't necessarily make intuitive sense. Rather than try to change that formula, Twilight Princess embraces this focus and uses it to elevate the experience, building around the single item focus to create unique and challenging puzzles which expand in complexity as you move through the dungeon. This gives a great sense of pacing and provides a consistent through line to the entire experience, and the fact that it also integrates with the world building of the area and Link's own deliberate efforts to better understand the culture of the Gorons is just really well done. So once we toast this guy's buns, he lets us pass to grab the hero's bow and arrows. And like, this thing just feels really good to use. I love the tension in the drawback, the ringing sound of firing a shot, how snappy and precise the aiming is with the combined stick and motion controls. Picking slugs off the ceiling with this feels fantastic, and it even combines with the iron boots for some upside down activating of crystals. In areas where previously we could only run from the Boblin archers, now the game practically turns into an FPS as we engage in a frantic shootout to take them all down. And then it all comes together in this final area as you take down the enemies, activate the magnet crane, shoot an arrow upside down to open the bridge, and then fight your way through a legion of soldiers to get to the boss chamber. There's a brilliant rhythm to the pacing of this dungeon, and all its disparate elements come together in a final crescendo as we carry this frantic energy into the final confrontation. And what we find is surprisingly dark and subdued. By touching the fused shadow, Darbus has been corrupted by the power of Twilight. Midna mentioned something to this effect earlier, that exposure to Twilight doesn't just turn people into spirits or beasts, but that they could also become shadow creatures. But what exactly does that mean to become a shadow of yourself? There is something similar going on in the Forest Temple as well, with the increasingly dangerous iterations of Deku Baba. It's like they were progressing towards some sort of corrupted ideal or form, and what we see here is perhaps a completion of that corruption or purification process. My interpretation is that the Twilight is a realm of extremes, whereas the world of light is a realm of nuance and balance. Shadow beings represent a sort of archetypal, symbolic precursor to the reality of the various citizens of Hyrule. They're like ideas given form. Fyrus looks like this, his name is Fyrus by the way, because collectively Gorons are understood to be big and strong and scary. In previous games this was less apparent, but especially in Twilight Princess they act very standoffish and intimidating to the point that you actually come to trading blows with some of them. There is a literal darkness spreading across this land, but more metaphorically, there's also a breakdown in communication between the people of Kakariko and the Gorons of Death Mountain. And that conflict has reduced each side to their darker, baser traits. In something like Plato's allegory of the cave, which is a philosophical thought exercise which involves a person who has spent his entire life chained to the floor in front of a burning fire. Occasionally, people, animals, and objects will pass by the cave and their shadow will be cast against the wall, and in this way he learns about the world. He knows reality only by a secondhand interpretation, by a reflection of its form, and so categorizes what he sees within that framework, rather than truly engaging with the nature of its being. And it's not his fault, he doesn't even know that there is more to see. To him, the entire world is the cave. He is chained by the shackles of convention, community, and mistrust, but Link isn't like that. Despite them pushing him away, he is engaged with the Gorons and learned more about their culture. He knows from experience that the Gorons down at the hot spring just want to hang out and have a good time, that the acting chief likes sumo and has really crazy nipples. Some Gorons are small and thoughtful and wise. We are all individuals, and that disparity, while making us different from one another, means in another more meaningful way that we're all the same. Through nuance and understanding, we are all united. And so, using all the skills accumulated in this dungeon so far, everything he's learned from the Gorons, from the sumo to the magnetic grounding to the use of the bow, he topples the monster and frees the individual inside, gaining the second part of the fused shadow along the way. If fire temples in these games represent the expression of Link's particular style of heroism, this version of the hero is truly focused on empathy and understanding, even if it means butting heads along the way. Midna seems especially pleased, so much so that she actually opens up a bit. She tells us the name of the King of Darkness who threatens Hyrule, Zant, and expresses her disdain for him, despite his supposed immense strength. Hilariously, Zelda takes a couple of strays here as well, as Midna wonders how someone who has lived a carefree life of luxury could ever truly understand the significance of duty. It's interesting to hear her speak so passionately about politics, underscoring perhaps some compassion for the common folk which she has kept hidden beneath her more selfish and snarky persona. This is actually something we caught a glimpse of in the Forest Temple as well, when she seemed almost unusually sort of jarringly interested in tracking down and rescuing all the monkeys before we even knew we'd need all of them in order to proceed. Still, she slips right back into character, saying she doesn't really care what happens so long as she can recover the pieces of the fused shadow, creating a portal for us to escape. And as she does, the final ebbs of darkness fade from Darbus, and as we go to check in on how he's doing... Oh, jeez. You're welcome. Oh, you just have more work for me. Having completed the dungeon, we are able to observe the tangible impact of Link's heroics in multiple ways. Colin seems braver now, able to stand up for himself, and the other children are more accepting and considerate. There's a repeating idea in these games of Link's heroic spirit reincarnating or manifesting across destinations, but in a less literal sense, heroic deeds themselves are self-replicating through these moments of mentorship and inspiration. The shaman seems to notice this as well, saying that our actions call to mind the deeds of the ancient hero and promising to watch over the children. We can also see that the Gorons have returned to Kakariko, and the place seems much livelier as a result. The hot spring up on the inn roof is open, trade has been reestablished with the mountain, and we can finally buy some bombs. Your actions in the dungeon weren't just about beating the boss, they brought people together in a visible and mechanically significant way out here in the overworld as well. This sort of empathetic interconnectedness between dungeon map and overworld kind of mirrors the more mechanical connections which I like so much in Wind Waker, but on a different kind of level. Alrighty then, time for some R&R down by the lake. We tear across Hyrule Field on Epona's back, taking out some birds along the way until we arrive at the Twilight Barrier. Through his wolf form, Link picks up an Ilia's scent, and we track her down across the sprawling fields of the Lanayru province, eventually arriving at the bustling castle town. Feels kind of satisfying to make it back here under your own power, and I quite like the sense of hustle and bustle this place has, all going on right under your nose. Following Ilia's scent and some clues from the townspeople, we track her down to a local bar, nosing our way inside. There's a tangible distinction that is drawn across these two separate arcs between rescuing the children and finding Ilia. Rescuing the children involved more straightforward heroics, crafting Link into a sort of aspirational hero, because, I mean, they're kids, so of course they need his help. But it seems Ilia has been able to get herself out of trouble, somehow ending up in Tema's bar looking after this sick Zora child. Link decides to help Ilia from behind the scenes, and it makes them seem more as equals to one another, complementary components of a more unified heroic ideal. As before, Midna comments on the fact that neither of them can see Link, but she doesn't seem quite as melancholic about it. In this case, it seems less important for his heroic deeds to be visibly broadcast. Link just wants to help Ilia succeed. And so, on the advice of these soldiers, we head on down to Lake Hylia to see what we can do. Wait, hold on. Yay! Oh. After escaping from the least stressful set piece of all time, we find that the water level has been drastically lowered at the lake, and seeing as how this is the one water source for the whole kingdom, that's probably not great. We talk to perhaps the most tragic character in the entire game, and head over to investigate this little shadow guy when suddenly he busts out a sweet solo on the grass and takes to the skies. Okay. Come on, this isn't really fair. Come down here. Oh wow, he actually did it. Give me that jugular. We fly up along the waterway to be greeted by a familiar sight. It seems that something has caused Zora's domain to freeze over, and the Zoras are all missing. With Midna's help, we climb up the mountain and tear through some shadow beasts at the top, only to be greeted by a chilling sight beneath our feet. We can't just leave them like this, reflects Midna, encouraging us to find a way to melt the ice. I mean, I figured it would just kind of magically thaw once we beat the boss or something, but I can't get to the light spirit, and she told me to use the portals, but like, where am I supposed to go? Wait, she doesn't mean... Is this really a good idea? Shouldn't we like do it slow? Oh man, they're all dead. Oh, okay, they're fine. As we move to take our leave, someone calls out, and it's actually a pretty striking moment to realize the voice is calling for Link, from someone who can actually see him. This voice belongs to this Zora woman, the Queen Rutella, who was executed by the Shadow Beasts to send a message to her people. Without her, the Zora had become directionless, literally frozen in place. She thanks us for restoring the flow of water, and implores us to protect her son, the prince, who we previously saw with Ilia. But, you know, we probably can't do much with our little wolfy hands, so we gotta grab the light bugs again and restore the spirit of light. I don't think this teardrop collection stage is really all that compelling compared to the previous two. This is because the bugs are so spread out and aren't really collected in ways that challenge your limited movement capabilities. Most of Zora's domain would be basically inaccessible to human form Link anyway, so wolf form Link with Midna jumps probably has better mobility here actually. I think that's probably why there's a bit of excitement injected towards the end by making one of the bugs huge and then turning it into a boss fight. Like, how much light did this guy eat? At last, we gather all the drops and head to restore the final spirit of light, Lanairu, which takes the form of this alligator, serpent, dragon kind of guy. And as it restores our form, it offers an ominous warning about the hidden darkness of the power of the Triforce. And here we have it, the infamous cutscene, the one that cemented this game as the edgy, try-hard Zelda. So let's go through it. I actually like this cutscene a lot, with how it builds on the established lore of Ocarina of Time while also establishing a deeper, even more pervasive sense of darkness. So, long ago, the three golden goddesses created Hyrule, the world of light, by establishing the land, the creatures, and the rules of nature, shown here with fun sparklies. By establishing order from chaos, it created the ability to learn from the predictability of its structure and take action to shape the future to your own advantage. This forceful action, a culmination of wisdom and foresight, courage from the actions and stories of the past, and power in the present, is an expression of will, which is that unique, divine spark of humanity. And the golden exemplification of that will made manifest is the Triforce, which exists in the Sacred Realm, the idea being that without force of will, there is no inherent morality to the rearrangement of physical reality. We see Link and Ilia standing side by side, Link undressed of his heroic garb to exemplify the fundamental aspect of his corruptible humanity. Standing before the immense potential and capability of the Triforce, Ilia loses her eyesight, turning with blade held in hand as the camera shows us lunging for her exposed neck. What does this mean? A man and woman are sort of a fundamental duality of the human spirit, an Adam and Eve kind of deal. And by working together in unison, the human spirit is completed and generations of individuals spiral forward into the future, Tengen Toppa Gorilla Gun. But this fragile balance was disrupted by the interlopers, who turned these harmonious aspects of duality against one another. And so as Link dispatches Ilia in his mind, he is restored to his heroic garb, believing in the perverse ego of the extremist self, running towards the three dark figures which resemble him, the sorcerous interlopers who use the power of the fused shadow to lay siege to the sacred realm. These three figures appear to be some shadow or reflection of the Triforce, and if you consider what kind of shadow the Triforce would cast, basically a downward-facing triangle, I think we can infer the significance of this threat. The Triforce can be used for good or for evil, and frankly, I'm not sure the gods seem to care all that much how it's used. Ganondorf got away with being a bit of a scamp for 7 long years in Ocarina of Time, but he was still playing the game, right? Creating the world in an evil image is still an aspect of the Triforce, and eventually the pendulum will swing back to good as a hero rises up to oppose that evil. The cycle is what it's all about. I think the deal with the interlopers is that they were after something even worse than evil, something even more irredeemable, dark. If light is existence, clarity, and disparity in reality, then dark is nothingness. With the power of their magic, the interlopers tried to destroy creation, to oppose the moral structure of reality by committing forbidden acts to crush the binary within themselves, believing in some sort of ascendancy through death of the self. And so the spirits of light intervened, sealing away that forbidden power. Those who do not know the danger of wielding power will before long be ruled by it. Never forget that. Link's connection to Ilia is what grounds him. It's the essence of his humanity and the drive behind his heroic endeavors. Striving to find our other half, that person who completes us, is what almost every story is about at its most fundamental level, and this struggle tells the full story of human civilization. But with power, we can become self-obsessed, ruled by the pleasures and conveniences at our disposal to the point that the struggle falls away, leaving us aimless and alone. Until eventually all we crave is to destroy that prison of reality which has lost its color and meaning, longing with a sort of perverse fascination for our missing aspect. This is the danger of the Triforce, the unspoken horror of its missing central triangle and the enticing shadow it casts on the heart of humanity. The struggle is the point. At least, I don't know, maybe. I'm just kind of spitballing. This cutscene's crazy, man. Alright, let's do that water temple. Upon restoring our human form, we can head back to Telma's bar, where we meet with Telma and Ilia directly. However, in continuing this theme of Link's heroics going unrecognized, Ilia has lost her memory. Despite this, she still remains singularly focused on helping the Zora child, which will require his transport over to Kakariko village. We get a sense of how dangerous this world has become for the ordinary person when we agree to escort the cart and keep it safe from monsters. I think Zelda games are at their best when they involve escorting NPCs, which I'm aware is an absolutely wild take. But when you dash across this world map on Epona's back, it's easy to forget how significant and rare this capability of expression and exploration truly is in this world. The average person cannot dash past monsters at breakneck speed, tank arrows and bites with magical armor, or strike down shadow beasts. Link's heroism feels pedestrian to the player, since activating the button prompts to move him around and engage in combat is pretty simple. But what he's actually doing in a literal sense is incredible, almost mythologically heroic, and these quiet moments emphasize the significance of his own willpower and capability. Well, okay, maybe cheating in the joust isn't the most heroic thing ever, but Midna told me to do it, blame her. The massive size of Hyrule Field pays off here as it gives us room to dash behind and ahead of the cart, knocking boblins off their horses or shooting enemies out of the sky. The pacing of the cart is just about right to instill that frantic sensation of barely keeping it together, and making it vulnerable only to flames, which can be extinguished using the boomerang, feels like a good compromise to establishing stakes without feeling overly frustrating. At last, we make it to Kakariko, where Renato is able to help the child, and Colin promises to remain by his side. Afterward, Telma hints at her involvement with some deeper organization in protecting the Kingdom of Hyrule, Illuminati, and extends a mysterious invitation to join her cause. And at last, we meet again with the Zora Queen, who leads us to the resting place of the Zora King to pass on the Zora armor, allowing us to move freely and swim underwater. It's a nice moment, but I'm gonna be a party pooper. It feels a little video gamey to me. Like, why is the King Zora buried here? Just to make it convenient? And why was he buried with a set of clothes that pass on Zora abilities? Was he not able to swim? Sometimes I feel like this game has such brilliant moments of storytelling intuition, and then other times it feels like the story is just an annoyance that tries to get out of the way to facilitate the gameplay moments. And to be honest, I especially feel that way heading off to the Zora Temple. Donning the armor, sinking down beneath the lake with the iron boots, unlocking the water bombs, and exploding open the narrow passage to the sealed temple within. These are all really good moments of exploration. And the water temple itself is really fun. It feels like a direct iteration on the water temple from Ocarina of Time, with puzzles involving raising water levels and moving various objects by directing its flow. Like that other water temple, the exploration here is not linear. The game challenges you to keep a mental note of the locked doors and suspicious-looking objects in each room. As you move, water levels, and grab keys, jumping back and forth between branches, spiraling off from the main waterway, progressing a bit further each time. The iron boots see even more use here in combination with the claw shot, which just feels so clunky and powerful and fun to play around with. But I don't really feel anything beyond this when I move through the dungeon. Like, it feels like the mines and the forest both had a very strong thematic messaging and consistency to their progression. Like, they fit with the story and Link's own style of heroism, but this dungeon just feels like content to me. Like, it's good content, but I don't know. I mean, it's not like every dungeon has to be a mini essay on philosophy or whatever, but what makes a Zelda game feel like a Zelda game to me is that deep fairy tale-esque symbolism and meaning that permeates every aspect of your adventure. And at least for me, at this point in Twilight Princess, it seems like that magic starts to fall apart just a little bit. I feel like I don't know anything about the Zora, who they are, or what they believe in, or how they interact with the rest of Hyrule. I guess maybe they're supposed to be seen as aloof and gated off from the world, but the bird ride up the river doesn't really convey that as well as climbing the waterfall did way back on the N64. And why did they all freeze over? Why did they steal off their temple? Is it just because these are story beats from Ocarina of Time? Even arriving at the final boss, this doesn't feel like the manifestation of the deep-seated evil in this area. It's just like a reference to my favorite little guy. Wait, just kidding, it's actually a Shadow of the Colossus reference. I don't know, I just wish the water temple were more mystical or thought-provoking or something. Maybe turn out the lights and really play with that deep water theme it keeps flirting with. Give us a waterproof lantern and really sell the horror of darkness and chaos and nothingness which is hidden underneath the seemingly still surface. You know, tap into that fear which was conveyed by Lanayru's warning. Or at least I thought we were going somewhere with Rutella and Wolflink being able to commune with spirits and pass on their blessings, but that idea just kind of fizzled itself out, and nothing in the temple builds upon this premise or feeling. Water is mystical, ritualistic, and healing. Maybe defeating the evil in this temple could have been the key to saving the Zora child, by releasing some healing water which conveys a loving regret of his mother from beyond the grave. Sorry, I don't mean to be so negative. I really do like the story in this game and the way it's presented for the most part. It's just that in previous games like the Wind Waker, it seemed like the developers were willing to cut out entire dungeons if they didn't fit the flow or sensibility they were aiming at. At times, it feels like Twilight Princess tries too hard to please everyone. To have as many dungeons as Ocarina of Time, to have a giant world map like Wind Waker, to be dark and brutalistic like Majora's Mask. It spreads itself so thin, and as a result, the aspects it does excel at, its philosophical inventiveness, its horror inspirations, which juxtapose its optimistic, empathetic outlook, these ideas get overshadowed by content that, at the end of the day, just feels like filler to me. We emerge from the temple, having collected the last piece of the fused shadow, and empowered by Midna's confidence and her ability to turn the tables on Sant, only for him to appear suddenly behind us. The visuals and sound design do a great job selling how creepy and horrific this guy is, as even Lanayru rises up out of the water, bearing its fangs in a shocking sort of fear-fueled fury to oppose the sudden appearance of this force of evil. However, it is easily banished by Zant, who returns the realm to Twilight and exposes Midna from Link's shadow, returning him to his bestial form. Zant places some artifact behind Link's skull and takes a few shadow pieces from Midna, scoffing at their ancient and withered power, his masked face giving him an imposing sense of detached, stoic indifference. He calls Midna a traitor, hinting at some shared history between them, and as she admonishes him for abusing the power of the shadow as the King of Twilight, he reveals a shocking, zealous side to his personality. He has no interest in the ancient magics of his tribe, for he has found a new god to follow. He whispers in Midna's ear, trying to convince her as a fellow resident of Twilight that she will never be accepted by the world of light. She will always remain a shadow to them. The only answer is to conquer their realm. The sickening sound of his wet, split lips and his hovering breath underlies the unknowable horror of this character as he nevertheless entreats her to join him, to act in the interest of her people. There's an important idea here, a central thesis which defines the heart of this game and the nature of Link and Midna's relationship. When Midna refuses to help Zant, he mocks her for her supposedly traitorous affection towards a world of light, exposing her to the full brunt of Lanayru's blind rage as the light envelops her completely. As he turns, we see that this was a distraction by Lanayru to transport Link and Midna away from Zant, but this exposure to so much light has left her withered and dying, barely able to cling to Link's back. It really resonates here how dangerous this realm has been for Midna, why she always expressed feeling more comfortable in Twilight. It's a deeply disconcerting moment to see the power of light, which has been our ally across all the Zelda games, be so corrosive and damaging to a character we have grown to care for. A voice rings out, telling us to seek the princess if we wish to recover our form from this curse. And the first time I watched this cutscene, it didn't even hit me that Lanayru doesn't mention helping Midna at all. As you carry her off to the sound of this haunting piano theme, it feels like a rescue mission, a desperate attempt to find a way to save her. But watching it again making this video, this callous disregard for her safety does perhaps echo some of that sentiment expressed by Zant. Midna is a creature of shadow. She will always be rejected by this world. And yet, despite this gap between them, Link goes racing off into the rain as night falls. I think, at its core, Twilight Princess is a game about trust. Now, to be fair, you could pretty much say that about any of these games, especially in their early moments. Zelda games typically start off with a basic 3-act structure involving Link exploring the world, meeting with the different people and cultures of Hyrule, and undergoing some ordeal which earns their trust and brotherhood, symbolized or sort of crystallized into a literal artifact which serves some plot significance or unlocks the path to the Master Sword, the awakening of his true heroic spirit. But there's a subtle shift in how this is all handled in Twilight Princess that I think is really interesting, and it drives at the central idea of Link as an empathetic hero in a world of horror. I think the Stone of Fire from Ocarina of Time is sort of the perfect representation of this idea played straight. Link needs to collect an artifact. His protectors, the Gorons, are at first a bit abrasive and unusual. I mean, they eat rocks and smash right into if you aren't looking out. But as you learn more about their way of life, connecting with Darunia through music and exploring their town, you gain the Goron's bracelet, which allows you to access and clear Dodongo's cavern. By clearing the dungeon and solving their environmental issue, you establish a strong connection of brotherhood with the Gorons and are given the stone to represent that bond. Similarly, with Din's Pearl and the Rito in Wind Waker, Kamali is literally clutching the pearl and refusing to part with it when you first meet with him. Only by clearing the dungeon and calming down Falu do you earn his trust and gain the artifact. What Twilight Princess does differently, however, is that the trust needs to be earned before the dungeon can even be accessed. Each of these early dungeons presents a breakdown in trust between two groups. For the Forest Temple, that's the Ordonians and the Monkeys of the Forest. At the start of the game, even the player might think it was the monkeys who kidnapped the children, only to find by the end that you misunderstood them, and that they were perhaps trying to warn the villagers about a growing evil in the woods. Rescuing the monkey from the cage and restoring Talos' trust is a prerequisite to even entering the dungeon. Similarly with the Gorons and the people of Kakariko, where Link had to learn to cheat at sumo, to understand the Gorons and break down their barrier before they allowed him to enter their dungeon. And finally with the sick Zora child, who it seems none of the Hylians cared about. Only Ilia and Telma were willing to help, and even in doing so, Telma was opening herself up to gossipy whispers from the townsfolk. The doctor refused to treat the child, the guards seemed only interested in helping Ilia, and even then they all fled at the first sign of danger. I mean, the Zoras were straight up in danger of extinction up in their domain, yet nobody went to check on them. They are the stewards and protectors of all water in the realm, but it seems the people of Hyrule were more worried about the fountain in the center of town malfunctioning than the existential crisis of their neighbors. There's a sickness to this world that extends beyond the encroaching shadow of Twilight, a darkness and mistrust between its people which has divided Hyrule and left it in pieces. But by his willingness to engage where others will not, to act in the shadows and put himself at risk, even to the extent that this experience others him, transforming him into a monster, Link's heroism becomes evident in how he is able to stitch these communities back together. Rescuing the monkey, returning the Gorons to Kakariko village, grabbing the molten rock from the volcano and whisking it away to Zora's domain, where it can be of use. The people of Hyrule are at their strongest when they work together, when they trust and engage with one another. But now, trapped in this monstrous form, the game does an incredible job at conveying the helplessness of the situation. As Midna's labored breaths drive you back into Castletown as a wolf, the townspeople running in fear and the guards brandishing their weapons at you. We need to get her to Princess Zelda, but nobody's willing to help us. Even at Telma's bar, which we thought might be a safe haven, we were kicked violently to the curb. How else can I get into the castle? You're thinking frantically to yourself, and then a glimmer of hope emerges. It seems the gentle, kind nature of Link's affinity for animals left its mark on Telma's cat, Luis, who recognizes him even in this form and teaches him of a way to sneak into the castle. When all else fails, even at his most desperate moment, Link is saved by that style and sensibility which was so foundational in his upbringing in Ordon village. Luis is the first to even acknowledge Midna's condition, recognizing the desperation and severity of our task. Midna speaks, calling out weakly for Zelda, and with Luis's help, we sneak across the upper levels of the bar back into the sewers. As we trawl through the sewers again and climb the tower, we feel the loss of Midna through our inability to one-shot enemies and the need to carefully navigate these hanging threads rather than jumping to the top. And at last, we meet with Zelda again. The realization that all of this effort, all the desperation and struggle in her dying breath was to find a way to save Link, to save you, is such an emotional gut punch. We've put so much effort into crossing divides and bringing people back together, but it feels like the person who has been the closest to Link all this time is also the one he had the hardest time trusting. At least to me, the idea that Midna would be acting in such a self-sacrificial manner in her final moments, that she would be so invested in saving Link in this world, it just kind of never occurred to me. The fact that this moment hit me like a twist kind of made me feel, like, sort of bad somehow, like I'd been assuming the worst of her this whole time. Zelda explains that this world is one of balance and contrast, with benevolence to drive away the evil which has caused Link's transformation. The Sword of Evil's Bane, the Master Sword, conveying the spiritual significance and mysticism of its power. And then Midna asks about the Mirror of Twilight. Somehow this question reveals to Zelda the heroism and selflessness which Midna has hidden behind her manipulations and sarcastic attitude. With an expression of regret over the role the World of Light has played in this ongoing tragedy, Zelda seemingly sacrifices herself to restore Midna's form and allow her to persist in this realm through some arcane magic. Midna yells for us to stop her, and as we stand by, she cries out in anguish, knowing what is about to happen. I think in many ways, Midna is the hero of this story as much as Link. She acts as a sort of foil to his own heroic spirit. I mean, she literally becomes his shadow. Something about that pact they made at the start of the game, that sadistic, almost demonic exploitation of Link's situation, it feels like it connected their spirits somehow, like two opposite sides of a coin. Unlike Link, who reaches others through genuine empathy and honesty, Midna hides her intentions through transactional manipulation and sarcasm. I think the reason the three artifacts we collect at the start of the game feel a bit different in tone from those of Ocarina of Time and Wind Waker are tied up in the idea that they don't really represent Link's connection to the world. These are shadow relics tied to a dark power. There are things that Midna wants, and she is using you to get them. I mean, in the Twilight Realm, she even rides around on your back like Link does with Epona. So far, this whole game has been the story of Link assisting Midna in her own efforts to collect these artifacts. I think that's why it comes as such a surprise that her intentions were so selfless, that her heart beats with a heroic destiny the same as Link's, just from an opposite perspective. One which is perhaps embarrassed or afraid to open themselves up to trusting others, who feels more comfortable in transactional, exploitative interactions which generate more predictable behavior. Midna is the last person Link needs to learn to trust, because can you really trust your own shadow? That darkness in your heart that whispers in your ear? I think that's why there's been such a focus in the narrative on drawing a contrast between shadow and darkness. A shadow is simply the inverse of the light shining on an object. It's a contrast and a complement which completes the picture, which is united in heart and intention despite its appearance. But darkness, at least in this game, is something much more sinister, something without connection to this world, a moral quality of evil which opposes good. Link's ability to draw the Master Sword in each game is a function of his ability to demonstrate mastery over the physical world, to have the maturity to understand evil and responsibly wield the power to banish it in a sort of divine moral judgment. A sword is a weapon, the power over life and death, and the Master Sword epitomizes that sort of kingly judiciousness which goes into being a hero. It's why Link had to grow up to wield it in Ocarina of Time, and why when he grappled with darkness in Majora's Mask, the blade was left behind. Who decides what is right and what is wrong? What sets Twilight Princess apart is that Link must also learn to trust the shadow, the unknowable shade, and in so doing, truly embody the power of Twilight, the simultaneous light and shadow. His alignment with Midna, his ability to understand her spirit and intentions and see through her protective, sinister persona creates an alignment of will which results in And then, in what is probably my favorite moment in the game, Midna asks for help. She doesn't demand or exploit or deceive. It seems kinda awkward for her, like she doesn't know what to do, but in response, Link smiles. It's just a nice little moment of character development that resonates with not only Link, but the player and their own preconceptions, which is expressed through story but also by the gameplay empowerment of regaining your human form and the ability to switch back into a wolf at will, harnessing and mastering that evil power rather than outright banishing it. For all its occasional stumbles and faults, Twilight Princess has this emotional sensibility that really sets it apart and makes its characters so resonant and compelling. It's a messy, ambitious game with all sorts of contradictions and missing pieces, but at its core, this is a story with such incredible humanity and heart. Also, it has a fishing minigame, which makes it a 10 out of 10 in my heart. We've been blasting through the story, so it might be nice to just kind of take a quiet moment and poke around Hyrule. At this point in the game, the map really opens up to you and reveals its darkly lonely and serene beauty. I think Breath of the Wild is a Zelda game that's most about isolation and connecting with nature, but there's something in the gloomy, empty structure of this version of Hyrule that really fills me with a sense of melancholy and reflection. It just feels like a world hovering on the edge of apocalypse, and these few quiet moments of solitude are so oddly resonant and beautiful. Anyway, I've been thinking about the Master Sword, as I often do. I mean, it's just like the coolest thing, right? The ultimate blade, the Sword of Evil's Bane. There's this feeling you get in each Zelda game when you draw the blade from its pedestal that's so consistently empowering and emotionally resonant. It sort of represents the epitome of each iteration of Link's personal story and identity. Like in Ocarina of Time, the Master Sword represented Link's desire to grow up and become a hero, to prove himself and justify that isolation he felt as a child in the Kokiri Forest. Ultimately, this ended up being his greatest downfall, which is why he decided to return the blade and leave it behind in Majora's Mask, representing the loss of his identity and ambition. In Wind Waker, the Master Sword represented a sort of false empowerment at first, encouraging Link to follow in the footsteps of his supposed predecessors, only to find that the blade had to be awakened by the discovery of his own unique spirit and identity. And here in Twilight Princess, Link and Midna's ability to trust one another empower them to take action against the encroaching evil which is creeping across the land. Although unique, what these ideas share in common is a sort of signaling of maturity, an understanding and mastery of self which conveys the necessary judgment to identify evil and take decisive action to banish it. And really, that's what I think the ideal of a sword represents. The Master Sword is a sort of epitome of sword symbolism, represents truth, integrity, power, and ultimately the sort of divine empowerment to cast judgment, to deal death according to your own will. I think that's why these scenes often draw so heavily from the Sword and the Stone mythology, where King Arthur pulls the blade Excalibur to prove his lineage and his divine right to rule. The Master Sword is a test of Link's understanding of the world, gained via the trials of the Trinity structure of this reality, and represents his worthiness to proceed to the second act of the narrative. And dude, fishing in this game is so hard, what the heck? Okay, whatever, I don't want these little fish anyway, they can stay there. From now on, our quest feels much more self-directed, and I'm a little lost, so we head back to Telma's bar to gather information. This will serve as our home base for the rest of the game, as Telma introduces us to the wacky members of the Resistance, who will aid us in tracking down the Mirror of Twilight. And hey, it's Russell. I like this little moment, where Link has grown enough to become a peer and equal to his mentor. Sky Island, predecessor race? Yeah, right, dude. At their direction, we find Auru out by Lake Ilia, who points out this ominous structure in the distance, the Arbiter's Ground. Located deep within the desert at the world's end, it was used to house the worst prisoners of Hyrule. By the magic of a cursed mirror, those criminals who were sentenced to death were supposedly sent directly to the underworld. Now the malice of those old prisoners haunts the condemned prison, and Auru instinctively believes this to be the epicenter of the evil which now grips this land. When we affirm our desire to head out there, he expresses his regret but does not try to stop us, instead hooking us up with a direct flight out to the Gerudo Desert. Before we can take our first step, Midna calls out to us, her body language surprisingly subdued and withdrawn. In a moment of connection, she says that she has something she wants for us to hear, explaining to us the history of the tribe from which those dark mages emerged and created the fused shadow. After their failed coup of the Sacred Realm, the goddesses chased them down across Hyrule and banished them to another realm. Midna describes this world as the antithesis to Hyrule, a place where the sun shines bright. It's strange, kind of a weird observation from her. Though I suppose the Twilight Realm is a world of contradiction, a shade to the logical and comprehensible Hyrule, the place where light and dark intermingle and coexist. It's just we've seen so much of the darkness which was cultivated in the Twilight Realm and now spills over into Hyrule, but it's striking that Midna sees the light there. The denizens of this realm eventually became shadows, incompatible with the world of light, forever doomed to dwell in the half-light of dusk, that eternal moment of crossover. She confirms what we had perhaps suspected, that she too is a descendant of this race known as the Twilight, expressing that she wants us to understand who she is and what she represents. Despite the trusting vulnerability of this moment, there's a strong sense of anxiety and trepidation as well. It's as if Xant's words have affected her, made her believe that nobody from the world of light could ever truly trust her. And in her confession of her connection to this tribe, she wants to see if Link would still be willing to help her. Link gazes ahead, not meeting her eyes, illustrating from her perspective that fear of not knowing how he will react, as we grow to understand why she has felt the need to extort and deal. To treat relationships as transactional and to never open up to others. Zant has radicalized his people, turning them into shadow beasts and leading a supposedly righteous campaign against the world of light, which has treated the Twilight as monsters for generations, a history of assumed guilt by the sins of their ancestry which we will soon grow to understand. Zelda's comments about the blame resting on the world of light resonate here, but Midna still believes in the gentle spirit of the Twilight and perhaps the possibility of coexistence. There's another tale told by my people, she says. Though the goddesses forbade us to return to the world of light, they left one link between the light and the darkness. This is the Mirror of Twilight. The world of light and the Twilight Realm should be two sides of the same coin, the light and shadow of Hyrule, but the moral aspect of their banishment casts the Twilight as denizens of the dark, a symbolic other meant to be shunned and excluded. And perhaps those ancient mages were deserving of this judgment, but the Twilight people are centuries removed from this ancient past. It's a bit heartbreaking that she thinks Link would abandon her here, but instead he acknowledges her past and accepts her, the two of them moving into the desert as equals. The open-ended design of the desert gives a compelling sense of exploration, even if they had to pull a little trick by separating this area off from the rest of the world map. This location is also apparently the headquarters for the Bulblins, which we will be fighting through as we approach the prison. Their proximity to the Mirror of Twilight perhaps explains their close connection with Zant and the Shadow Beasts, and in fact, as we have some time to digest the previous cutscenes, a few points become clear. First of all, Hyrule has been sending condemned criminals out to the Gerudo Desert for who knows how long, in a not-my-problem sort of governance strategy that compounds the isolation from the protection of the kingdom we saw with the Gerudo and Ocarina of Time. And beyond that, they aren't even carrying out those executions themselves. Like, you know the line. Although I probably shouldn't use copyrighted audio if I don't want this video to get claimed. I'm already getting dinged on having Midna's Lament earlier. Okay. The man who passes the sentence should swing the sword. Sorry. But you know, rather than that, they're just dumping everybody into the Twilight Realm like some big garbage heap and hoping it takes care of itself. All those interlopers are in there, so let's just throw in a few more. The failure of the leadership of Hyrule to distinguish between evil criminals and the shadow denizens of the Twilight Realm, and beyond that, their cowardice in swinging the blade to eradicate evil, compounded this moral imbalance which resulted in Zant's uprising. And this is true in more ways than one, as we'll soon see. But before we get to that, Link has another showdown with the King Bulblin. The two clash, and honestly with all of my training from Skellig Grandpa, he's kind of a pushover, but in a fit of rage, he sets fire to the place. Even to the stones, dang, this guy means business. So we saved the boar from the flames, dashing off through the wooden barricades to reach the Arbiter's grounds. And man, it just keeps getting worse and worse. The Arbiter's grounds isn't just a prison, it's a massive coliseum. The implication here is that these criminals were forced to fight for the entertainment of the Hylians, with the losers perhaps tossed into the Mirror of Twilight as a point of spectacle. This is reinforced by the name of the location. An arbiter is someone who settles a dispute, often in a sort of militaristic or political context, like perhaps if a criminal should be sentenced to die. If this was going on during the period of Ocarina of Time, which it was by the way, but we'll get to that in a minute, if these blood sports were hidden far out in the desert beyond the clean, sanctified bounds of the Kingdom of Hyrule, the celebration of opulence and bloodthirst as the people of the desert starved and the winds brought endless death, I can honestly kind of see where Ganondorf was coming from. Not that the Ganondorf of Ocarina of Time would be a good ruler. The game presents plenty of evidence as to how his lust for destruction and vengeance disqualified his own leadership potential. But there's something chilling here. Now, it might just be putting together pieces that weren't meant to be directly linked like this, seeing as these games were made years apart from each other. But in retrospect, the existence of the Arbiter's grounds raises the rather disturbing question as to why the Colosseum like Gerudo's training ground from Ocarina of Time needed to exist in the first place. We don't see any Gerudo at all in Twilight Princess, which, like, maybe the desert is a big place and we just don't see him? Or maybe they were all thrown in the Colosseum, I don't know. Let's get through the dungeon first. The Arbiter's Grounds is an incredible dungeon. In terms of thematic consistency, atmosphere, presentation, this probably ranks up there as one of my absolute favorite Zelda dungeons, alongside like the Great Bay Temple, the Wind Waker Earth Temple, and maybe like the Forest Temple from Ocarina of Time. I can't believe I'm saying this about the dungeon where you do sick kickflips over the haunted skeletons of doomed spirits, but this place does such a good job conveying Link's gradual understanding of the dark history of bloodsport and slaughter which stains the history of Hyrule, while also recovering a small glimmer of hope for redemption moving forward. Even if it's not used much in the game, the lantern justifies its own existence by the unique sense of tension you feel when the game offers you up a place to refill your oil before heading into a dungeon. This is such a great compromise in design. It builds anticipation of what's to come and allows there to be a consequence to managing your lantern poorly, having to run back to the start of the dungeon, without needing to ruin the surprise by giving you a place to top up in each room that requires the item. And as you head inside, we finally encounter a set piece which uses darkness as a mechanic. As you frantically juggle your lantern on and off while fending away the seemingly endless swarms of little tiny ankle biter skeletons, and with each passing moment your oil drops lower and lower. It's a bit of a misdirect since this is pretty much the only place where darkness is used as a mechanic like this, but we'll have to use the lantern again later on in other interesting ways. I think this little antechamber with the 4 pose is also absolutely brilliant. This is a great example of making a reference to Ocarina of Time while also establishing a unique premise which leverages the storytelling strengths of Twilight Princess. The pose here are horrific and human-sized rather than cartoonish little entities, grounding the idea that these are criminals who are executed here, whose darkness and regrets linger. And the way Wolf Link just launches at their throat with a bestial precision, tearing out their heart and tracking their lingering scent is bizarre and contradictory and compelling, like those supernatural entities are nothing more than prey to him. This early section of the dungeon is like one interconnected puzzle, in which you are tasked with switching back and forth between your wolf and human forms to track the remaining pose, with recursive design that sees you finding unique ways to move around your environment, unlocking shortcuts, setting up distance to pull back chains, uncovering cryptic chambers, and unearthing more slumbering spirits. The indicator of the pose smell gives the designers enough freedom, what does a ghost smell like? Sorry, to just turn you loose in this puzzle box and figure things out for yourself. And in the little moments where you realize that you can stand in the middle of the falling chandelier, or that the suspicious hole in the floor creates a path beneath for you to claw shot up, it creates this awesome sense of satisfaction and reward. And this all works because the game does a great job establishing trust with the player, and making you believe that if you get stuck somewhere, but you look around and really pay attention, you'll find a way out. As we progress through, we face various pestilences and plagues, fending off these shadow vermin or using the lantern to scatter swarms of bugs, which will hinder our movement across a series of dangerous obstacles. These moments underlie the sickness and disease which may have swept through this place, still haunting these halls as a sort of lingering stain. Having confronted the nature of this evil, Link defeats the pose and returns their lantern light to the central chamber, communicating through gameplay and visuals that he is illuminating and puzzling together the dark history of this place. Then you unlock the second half of the dungeon, where the game just straight up gives you a Beyblade skateboard and lets you shred all over these lame-o skeleton posers. It's so weird, and I can't really explain it, but this just works for me. Like, it makes sense in the bizarre, kind of stupid way. I love the idea that there are these massive gears, complex, ancient machinations which are lingering just beneath the surface, waiting to be spun up again to reveal their world-shaping influence. Turning this bloodied ground of reference into a sick skate park strikes that perfect tone of disrespect and exploitation that is implied from the Colosseum-like design. This still haunts this place with an undying malice. The boss fight pits us up against a massive skeletal warrior resurrected by Zant in a gigantic central chamber. And just the existence of this guy sparks so many questions. Was this a giant? What was his crime? Was this some sort of observation chamber or a staging zone for the Colosseum? Did he fight all these other little guys in some sort of test to try to win his freedom? The rising tension of gaining enough height to survive his onslaught of fireballs is compelling and exciting, and kickflipping into his face fills you with a unique blend of like punk empowerment and also feeling kind of bad. Anyway, with him defeated, something a bit odd happens. Midna doesn't open a portal for us to leave. Rather, we grab the heart piece and then we head outside. Way up above, we find the mirror chamber, seemingly the open-air arena of the Colosseum. And as we approach the massive chained monolith at the center, a small army of shadow beasts descend from the sky to protect it. In defeating them and spitting up those ancient gears at the top, we find... This should be the Mirror of Twilight, but Midna is horrified and infuriated to find that it appears to be broken, shattered to pieces. As she mourns that last connection between the two worlds, that one desperate hint at redemption left behind by the goddesses, a strange voice speaks up. They warn of a dark entity which lurks in the shadow. I think this reveal is great. I know it's kind of controversial, and he does sort of steal the spotlight from Zant towards the end. And yeah, it is kind of piggybacking off the reference you're expected to hold for this character from playing the other games. But it all just works so well for me. The sages explain the dark history of this land, with their words and the visuals of a horse against a wall of flames calling to mind the Ganondorf of Ocarina of Time, and then wait a minute, it actually is him. And all the gears just start to click together. This is what happened to Ganondorf in the Child timeline. He was subdued and apprehended before he could take over the kingdom. Piecing it together with what is mentioned by Ganondorf in the Wind Waker, it means that the Arbiter's ground existed back during the events of Ocarina of Time. That the Gerudo were starving and dying in the desert, while mere miles away, corrupt Hylians were celebrating an opulence, spectacle of blood sport and death sentencing. Ganondorf's hatred and fury were condemned before he even had a chance to enact his revenge, giving these proceedings a sense of unfairness and cynicism that dulls the moral sensibility of sealing him away. When the Triforce of Power appears on his hand, and he uses this power to tear apart his bindings as the sages watch in confusion, believing in ignorance this to be some kind of divine prank rather than being willing to acknowledge the purity of his will. I mean, in an evil way, but still, it's like you almost want to root for the guy in his rebellion of spirit. And like, this isn't to say that I think Ganondorf is justified in any of his iterations. He grew up surrounded by death, and this imbued him with a fear and fascination of it that clouds his judgment and leads him to take destructive and impulsive actions. But this isn't a simple cut and dry case of good versus evil either. Ganondorf lacks that worthiness of rulership, the right to wield the Master Sword, but when everything comes together you can really understand what went wrong. Where this evil inside him came from, why it took root, and how it was perhaps redeemed in Wind Waker and catalyzed into something apocalyptic here in Twilight Princess. Sealing Ganondorf callously in the Twilight Realm and ignoring the issue simply allowed it to fester and grow, to corrupt and corrode what could have been a complementary counterpart to Hyrule, a gentle realm of eternal sunshine and timeless night. Link's courageous spirit has at last shined a light on this horrific neglect of duty, and the sages realize their mistake as Midna dejectedly tells them that it's too late now. Even though it's just a short cutaway, this is a really powerful moment for her. It represents in a sense what she always wanted, to make the people of the World of Light understand how their abuse of the Twilight Realm was damaging her people. Only now, after Zant has risen to power and is threatening the World of Light, are they selfishly able to finally understand. Her dejection and hopelessness is so genuine and impactful. Still, there is a chance yet to fix things. The sages explain where to find the scattered pieces of the mirror, and this harsh, judgmental look on Link's face is striking, which softens just for a moment as Midna touches his shoulder. It's the first time we've really seen him like this. At last, he fully understands the complex machinations which have shaped this conflict. The sinister corruption behind the masks of the sages, and with the power of the Master Sword, he alone has the ability to correct these mistakes of the past and right the balance between the two realms. Although it lays out some important groundwork, in some ways I felt that the first half of Twilight Princess was very stifling and directed. I mean, I know all the 3D Zelda games up to this point have been fairly linear, go to place, do thing, go to next place, but it felt especially constraining to me here. However, after drawing the Master Sword and establishing a base of operations in Telma's bar, there's this sense of the world opening up to you, of feeling more like a Zelda game. It gives you a chance to breathe, to try out some side quests, bomb random rocks in the overworld, visit shops and settlements again to see what has changed. We are demonstrating this mastery of the world we've been slowly liberating from the Twilight, and this idea becomes especially clear as we head off to Snowpeak, the quiet mountains which border Hyrule just outside Zora's domain. When we arrive, we find Ashe, who grew up in this area, and she warns us to the danger of heading off into the blizzard without a solid sense of direction. She mentions a strange cryptid who lives in the area that loves the taste of stinky fish, which leads us to ask around Zora's domain to discover that the prince knows how to catch said fish, which leads us back to Kakariko, which inspires the recovered prince to return to Zora's domain and lead his people. Again, we're seeing that classical Zelda structure of interlinked low-stakes fetch quests, which elevates the sense of community and reveals to Link via these connections the path forward. I think this sort of dynamic is integral to the identity of the Zelda series, even if the logical leap to smell the fish as a wolf got me stuck for like half an hour. I really can't cram this stupid fish in the bottle, what good is this thing? Alright, well, having tracked the scent, it guides us up the mountain path as we switch between our wolf form to dash around the deep snow and the human form to do stuff that, you know, you need thumbs for. At last, we find a mysterious creature standing high above the mountaintops. And I absolutely love this guy. This entire section of the game is so charming and unique. Link being a member of a secret society which tracks various cryptid creatures across Hyrule is a surprisingly perfect fit for this series, and also this particular iteration of the character, given his affinity for nature and ability to connect with animals. It also intersects well with the central narrative. Establishing the Twilight Realm and the Shadow Beasts as a sort of emergent, centralizing threat against a backdrop of more mundane, mysterious entities. The Yeti leads us back to his gigantic mansion deep in the mountains, and as we step inside, we slowly realize that this is going to be the next dungeon. It's such a strange and fascinating idea. It's almost hard to describe the incredibly charming experience of completing this dungeon without going through it yourself. We are introduced to the Yeti's wife, whose name is Yetta, by the way, and her husband is named Yeto. I know, it's really good, they're the best. Anyway, she isn't feeling well. She's bundled up by the fire and asks us to join her, which, you're not contagious, right? Don't cough at me, please. She tries to help us out in finding the mirror piece, giving us the dungeon map, which is basically just like the blueprints for her house, and marking various places where she thinks it might be. But the fever has made her a bit woozy, so we end up just gathering bits of food instead, which we can hand off to Yeto to help him improve his suit. This little central area serves as our sort of base of command where we can endlessly refill our soup bottle and take a moment to rest. As we move further away from the safe zone, however, the mansion becomes increasingly rundown and dangerous, with exposure to the harsh elements giving rise to various monsters and obstacles. Snowpeak Ruins captures this really fascinating fairy tale aesthetic. It actually reminds me a lot of a story from The Witcher, A Grain of Truth. It's one of the older short stories where Geralt, on the path of investigating some suspicious deaths in the area, meets a mysterious beastman in the woods. Despite his initial expectations, the man named the villain ends up being polite and well-mannered, inviting Geralt into his surprisingly ornate mansion and treating him warmly to a feast. Actually, the ending to both stories is surprisingly similar as well. All is to say, the juxtaposition of comfy cottage interior with the complex, dangerous environments of a Zelda dungeon do a great job to sell the mysticism and otherworldliness of this place. Most of the puzzles here are great, except for whoever decided burying a key in the courtyard was a good idea, and vary widely in complexity and scope. In the more traditional Zelda single room style, you have this large ice block puzzle. I don't even like these sliding ice puzzles that Nintendo seems to be obsessed with, but this one is like actually genius. And it even builds on itself in surprising ways when you incorporate the dungeon item here, the ball and chain. Ball and chain allows you to smash the various ice barriers which line the mansion, unlocking shortcuts and opening connections between previously explored spaces in a manner that calls to mind the best recursive level design qualities of games like Dark Souls. All of this culminates in an incredible puzzle where you escort a cannonball across various obstacles spanning almost the entirety of the mansion, encountering and clearing roadblock after roadblock in surprising and innovative ways until at last you fire off a cannon into the upper courtyard level to clear a ladder from near the very start of the dungeon. Up here we meet with Yetta, who's feeling a bit better after having drank our upgraded soup, and she escorts us to the bedroom to receive the mirror. The stakes of the Snowpeak ruins are smaller and more personal than is typical for a Zelda dungeon. There's no environmental calamity, no cultural pressures to overcome. If you look at it broadly, it's basically just helping Gerudo to care for his sick wife. But the implications here are massive, I think, in challenging Midna's optimism over the nature of the Twilight Realm and the future for her people. It's kind of tragic, honestly, to see how surprised she is that a shard of the mirror could have such a corrupting influence over someone from the world of light, causing Yetta's sickness and eventual corruption by seemingly amplifying her darkest tendencies and obsessions. When the goddesses banished the Twilight to the Twilight Realm, they left behind the mirror as a link between the worlds. Midna had always interpreted this as a sign for potential redemption, despite its callous abuse in the hands of the sages. But now it seems there is something much more sinister and perverse. A sort of dark magic which permeates the nature of the mirror and calls into question her own surprising naivety over the intentions of the goddesses and the reality of this world. The ending to this dungeon is very cute, but it's undercut by this growing sense of pessimism that will continue to fester beneath the surface. Alright, so next up is the Temple of Time, and look, to be honest, I mean, I like the gameplay and flow of this dungeon a lot, but okay, in terms of like just storytelling alone, it's probably the weakest one in the whole series. It just has this air of obnoxious self-referential esteem while lacking the wink and a nod sensibility of something like the Wind Waker, which could pull these moments off. Plus, it just doesn't really make that much sense. Link heads back to the woods outside Ordon to grab a golden chicken for muscle and fly back across the gorge to where he pulled the Master Sword. As he approaches the grove, the Skull Kid returns and we get to do that same routine as last time, and we know it's much easier to get lost. These little puppet guys will just not leave me alone. Anyway, once we get through that, we return to the Sacred Grove, and like, what is the intended direction here? At first I thought I had come to the wrong place, but eventually I found the only interactable object, the sword pedestal. So Link puts the Master Sword back in the pedestal, and then pulls it back out again, and this makes a statue disappear that opens up a mystical set of double doors back in the ruins, and if you step through them, you seemingly pass through time to realize that we are now standing in a fully restored version of the Temple of Time. It's just like, what? I really don't get it. Everything else in this world is geographically placed roughly where it was in Ocarina of Time, from Kakariko Village in the graveyard at the base of Death Mountain to the waters of Zora's domain flowing down to Lake Hylia. So why would the Temple of Time be in the Lost Woods? I mean, these are the Lost Woods, right? I assume that Ordon Village was positioned somewhere nearby, perhaps on the outskirts of the forest just beyond the bounds of the kingdom, and that maybe some version of Link, knowing the power of the weapon and its connection to the Sacred Realm, had taken the blade away from the castle town to a quiet grove where it could rest in peace. But no, apparently this is the Temple of Time. Did the castle town move? Did the temple move? Did they build a second temple around the sword? And like, why would sticking the sword into and out of the pedestal do anything? Am I rebooting a computer or something? It feels so artificial. It's like, there isn't even a puzzle here. It's just, well, you're Link, and there's a pedestal there, so obviously people are going to put their sword in it, so let's make that unlock the dungeon. And then when you get inside, you have to do it again with a different pedestal. Or maybe it's the same pedestal, but like older. Is there like a switch under these pedestals that's activated by stabbing? Can you use it more than once? And then once you get into the temple proper, only the first few rooms look anything like the Temple of Time. This dungeon is actually a gigantic 8-floor tall tower filled with monsters and elaborate traps. And like, what does this have to do with time? Okay, don't get me wrong. I really like the structure of this dungeon. It feels very like classic Zelda with the Zalfos and the spinning spiky blocks and the big glowing diamonds on the walls. It kind of reminds me of the Spirit Temple from Ocarina of Time in that way. It's fun to play through, and the fight against the mini-boss Darknut is exhilarating like they always are in these games. And the twist of you guiding a statue back down the tower, just smashing past all the obstacles which hindered you on the way up is so satisfying and unique. But if you'll indulge me a little conspiracy, I really feel like this content wasn't intended to be in this game originally. It's pretty well known that some of the cut content from Wind Waker ended up in Twilight Princess, and to me this feels like what the Tower of Gods was at one point intended to look like in the Wind Waker. Through that lens, it all kind of makes more sense. I mean, first of all, and most apparent, is a recycling of the command a statue mechanic to solve puzzles using the Dominion Rod, which is actually much more fleshed out and interesting here. In Wind Waker, this represented the hope of the gods in cultivating a savior who would command the people and tell them what to do, which is an aspect of his destiny which Link deliberately resisted, in contrast to the King of Red Lions. But beyond that, the multi-floor structure also fits with that tower to reach the heavens idea. I always thought that the Tower of the Gods was kind of stubby in the Wind Waker. And then the boss fight at the end against the very first boss from Ocarina of Time, but revived as a sort of horrific mechanical automaton. The self-referential visuals don't feel obnoxious if they represent the gods literally trying to force a roll onto a resistant hero, like in the Wind Waker. You actually don't even use the Master Sword to banish this boss, you squish it with these giant hands, and for Wind Waker Link this idea would be thematically interesting, like he is unaware of the supposed destiny of his past and finding his own goofy way to do things. It also fits more with the bizarre realization that this is just some little spider thing which was transformed to resemble Goma. I can picture a scenario where an exasperated Link is chasing around a cuter, cel-shaded version of this creature to squish it in a way that resonates with the humor and tone of the Wind Waker. But here it feels almost a little bit vindictive and cruel, which is so out of character for a version of Link attuned to the protection of nature. Midna reinforces her growing doubt as to the evil nature of the mirror shards in a much less subtle way, and I don't know, I mean, it's fine. To be clear, I don't think it would have been a good idea for any of this stuff to be in the Wind Waker either. They aren't really great story beats for that version of Link, and the God Hand boss fight is actually much more interesting. And at least this whole experience still kind of builds on the idea of us investigating the mysterious creatures and mythologies of the land, so, it's not that bad. But as we close in on the final mirror shard, Link finally gets to properly put back on his cryptozoologist hat as we investigate the mysterious ruins of an ancient precursor civilization in the sky. This section involves probably one of the longest pre-dungeon fetch quest rituals in any of the games, and I think is absolutely fantastic. It weaves a variety of loose ends and forgotten plot points with the ongoing emotional narrative of Link's journey, subtly nudging us to reconnect with the various people of Hyrule and to understand their united fate and the impact of our heroic actions thus far. It even redeems the Dominion Rod and entrenches it as a central artifact to unlocking the cryptic history of this land. When we return from the Temple of Time, we find that the rod has decayed and rusted, losing that power that Oko had hoped would help bring her back to her home in the sky. In order to fix it, we set off on a series of fetch quests, which take us back and forth between Kakariko and Telma's Bar, eventually discovering that the secret behind this rod may also be the key to unlocking Ilia's lost memories. With the help of the restored Goron Chief Tharbus, we were able to bust open the sealed pathway to a long-abandoned town, now crawling with monsters. I love the silly spaghetti western set piece. The stealthy, systematic clearing of enemies from a quiet western town offers an interesting sort of characterization to Link's heroism. The sort of romanticized lone wanderer cowboy archetype of a hero is often portrayed as someone with very few attachments to the physical world, something like a spirit of vengeance or justice which rolls into town like a tumbleweed and departs on the next breeze. This reflects Link's willingness to help others in secret. From behind the veil of anonymity in the Twilight Realm, disguised as a wolf or as a supposed stranger to an amnesiac friend. But Link's greatest power comes not from his individualism, but from the strength of community which ignites around the sparks of his heroism. After all, it was only by forging a strong bond with the Gorons that we were able to find this village in the first place. Connections are equal to capability, and there is utility and power in bringing the people of Hyrule together. And at its most basic, its most binary, this means restoring Link's connection to Ilia. So, after clearing out the enemies, we meet with Impaz, the last remaining resident of the secret village, who by royal order has long been awaiting a certain person. It seems at some point Ilia was being held here as well, perhaps being initially brought here after her kidnapping, but Impaz helped in orchestrating her escape. Somewhere along the way, she met the Rito Prince and then lost her memory. We know this because Impaz mentions how Ilia would often express her belief that Link would come to rescue them. In living up to this belief, we receive the charm from Impaz and return to Ilia. At the start of the game, Ilia was quite protective of Epona, often sneaking her away from Link, and his carelessness in allowing her to become injured set an uncomfortable tension between them, which never truly resolved. Beyond those opening moments of the game and rescuing Colin, we haven't really been utilizing Epona much. It's as if a certain aspect of Link's identity went missing along with Ilia's memories. But now, realizing that Link has been by her side all along, Ilia expresses her trust in Link to protect Epona, releasing him from this guilt and empowering his heroic spirit. With a renewed sense of purpose, we connect with Shad down below, who is investigating the various owl statues which dot the land of Hyrule. He seems to be missing some sort of command word, and if we follow Ilia's advice and reconnect with Impaz, showing her the Dominion Rod, she recognizes us as the prophesized messenger of the heavens and provides us with a codex. Thus begins an expansive quest across the entire map of Hyrule, restoring power to the Dominion Rod and using it to manipulate various owl statues to solve some thoughtful puzzles. There's a few things I really like about this quest. First of all, it gives you a moment to breathe towards the end and connect with the world map, because in addition to finding the hidden language marks, you're also bumping into treasure chests and adding heart pieces to your collection. The emphasis on using Epona to move more quickly reinforces her attachment to Link and the significance of Ilia's charm. The warp points are spread around just enough to make having easy access to Epona vital, and in this moment you really start to feel the lack of the Elden Bridge warp point, since we need to warp way out of the way, like up in the Zora's domain to get back over there. Speaking of which, once we head back here, we see that the prince has returned to lead his people, offering some closure to that storyline as well. It really feels like our whole journey is coming to a point as we embark on this cryptic quest to discover the ancient secrets of this world. There's a really unique sense of adventure to this point of the game, somewhere between like an Indiana Jones style archaeological endeavor and the first few moments of a disaster film, as it feels as though we are slowly unraveling some grand central conspiracy. I seriously think that Link investigating ancient supernatural mysteries fits this series so perfectly, and this moment in particular made me realize that supposed alien Zelda game could totally work. Anyway, as we head out in the desert to search for one of the owl statues, this bizarre structure far in the distance captures our attention. Drawing closer, we discover it to be the missing Elden Bridge and are able to carefully restore it. We'll come back to this in a second. Anyway, with the owl statues discovered and the codex completed, at last we unlock the ancient chamber beneath Kakariko and discover the Sky Cannon. With a bit of patching up from fire, the cannon stays fire. The cannon is restored to working order, and without a moment's hesitation, we blast off to the city in the sky. The reveal of this mystical ancient civilization floating high above Hyrule serves as such an effective payoff to that slow build of intrigue, with a transcendent, almost divine aspect to its design. We reunite with Oko, discovering that this is the home of the Oka tribe, but unfortunately our sightseeing is cut short by the appearance of a dragon soaring in overhead. So we head off to help Oko save her home, and then immediately run into a roadblock. After crossing the bridge, we're faced with a large gap and seemingly no way across. I got stuck here for a minute, exploring the other paths to try to find a way forward, and then finally tried talking to the other Okas, only to accidentally pick one up, and that moment's where it all clicks. I love the idea of the Oka being like some sort of strange primordial ancestry to the Kukos. It feels goofy and self-referential, but in a way that enhances the bizarre sense of wonder and cryptic mystery. As if the modern day Kukos we've been messing with all this time are the evolutionary evidence of an ancient connection with a bizarre alien-like race that seeded the beginnings of civilization. If the message of Twilight Princess is something along the lines of building civilization through the establishment of bridges of trust, the city in the sky represents the sort of prototypical idealized version of that construction, a veritable society of bridges and connected structures. And our first mechanical introduction to the dragon, which threatens this lofty, almost sacred community, involves him destroying these very bridges. So, what's the deal with all these bridges in Twilight Princess? It seems the Shadow Beasts have a real affinity for smashing them up and tossing them aside. Link and Epona have their climactic battle with the King Bulblin on a bridge. The Shadow Beasts attempt to trap Link on the bridge above Lake Hylia. In fact, Link and Russell crossing the bridge to Ordon Village was one of the first visuals established in the game, and introduced that feeling of paranoia which so centrally defines its basic premise. Beyond that, there are also more abstract bridges which play important roles in the story, like the Mirror of Twilight or the Sky Cannon. The city in the sky, this prototypical precursor civilization, is basically built out of bridges. I mean, every Zelda entry has bridges of some type, but in a game so heavily constructed around the symbolism of binary structures, I don't think the visual emphasis here is a coincidence. At its most fundamental, a bridge connects two separate points. Those points can be geographic in a literal sense, but more figuratively, bridges serve as a link between people. And when those connections are severed, the strength of a community begins to falter. Throughout the game, Link's actions of heroism have been focused on restoring these faulty connections, reuniting the Hylians, the Gorons, the Zora, and even reaching out to the Yetis and the Oka. The Shadow Beasts resent such connection because they live in a realm where the logic inherent in the idea of separation is a meaningless distinction. Where light and dark coexist simultaneously, where the sun never rises or sets, a world beyond the narrative cycles of good banishing evil and corruption decaying order. Binary structures imply separation. It's built into the system, and the greatest strength of distinction is in the ability to connect, to find common ground. Link and Midna are united in their goal to restore their greatest, most ambitious bridge, the connection between the Light and Twilight realms. But the seed of doubt has already been planted. Can there ever truly be trust established between realms which operate according to incompatible moral and logical structuring? Getting back to the dungeon itself, I love all the little design elements that elevate the wonder and mysticism of this place. The way the Okas walk nonchalantly along the walls, the doors opening themselves automatically rather than requiring Link to shove them aside, the haunting music with the strange chicken-like chattering. It kind of reminds me a bit of the Stone Tower Temple from Majora's Mask in terms of spiritualism and symbolic significance. After a bit of adventuring, we discovered the dungeon item, which is another claw shot. The game even plays it off as a bit of a joke, and the visual of Link holding one claw shot in each hand is a bit silly, but I think there's a deeper meaning even to this goofy subversion. With two claw shots, Link now has the ability to hold onto one connection point and then search for another, jumping from point to point and building a fluid set of interconnections that fundamentally transforms his ability to navigate his environment. This idea of the binary returns, and it reflects something intrinsic to the human nature. If you look at a person, we are built out of complementary pairs. We have 2 hands, 2 feet, 2 eyes, 2 ears, 2 nostrils. Even our brain is divided fundamentally into a left and right side. The way we perceive the world and the way we interact with it are built around binary constructions. And it isn't just that we have 2 identical hands mounted onto our arms. The hands are mirror images. They're complementary to one another. It's kind of weird to think about, like, why didn't our process of evolutionary development just slap like 2 identical hands on each arm? You'd think it would accomplish basically the same outcome. But by mirroring the structure on the opposite side, it basically allows your left hand to approach problems differently, to grab things from an opposite perspective that might be advantageous in certain circumstances. The blending of 2 opposing perspectives into a unified existence is what defines the human spirit. And by having 2 claw shots, Link's symbolic ability to literally link together opposing points with a grappling chain is elevated spiritually to the next level. Defining the nature of his heroism and establishing an optimism that he could be the one who unites the mirror worlds of the Light and Twilight Realm. With that in mind, this dungeon builds significantly upon this expanded capability, challenging you with a variety of complex structures to move across and climb through. The puzzles here are intuitive, but consistently surprising, and I feel mostly very positive about the structure of this dungeon. Some of the time-gated mechanics can be a bit frustrating to wait to cycle if you miss them the first time, but I would say that these little moments where Link's journey reflects a mastery over time tend to be the most mechanically impactful for his character, like when you manipulate the tides in Wind Waker. The dungeon maybe starts to overstay its welcome just a bit towards the end, although I might just be salty that I didn't realize at first you were supposed to stop the fan up above way at the end of the dungeon and then descend back to the central chamber, and then I just walked all the way back without doing that. Anyway, eventually we arrive at the final boss fight, and I mean, I'm a sucker for a spectacle, so I like this battle quite a bit, but I don't know, it also feels a little off. Squaring off against a massive dragon in this huge open-air arena inspired some spark of heroic investment in me, like the story was truly reaching its climax. But the fight itself just really ends up being a puzzle on how to use the claw shots effectively. It lacks that sort of tactile, brutalistic combat that this game has captured so well this far. And although the derivative Shadow of the Colossus-style takedowns at least feel better integrated and earned in this scenario, as you dash from point to point, manipulating the dragon's attention to open it up to damage, it somehow still feels as though it's lacking the sort of edge or intensity it's supposed to convey. Still, I think the City in the Sky is an incredible dungeon experience and an excellent send-off to this arc of the story, a capstone to our discovering and connecting with the ancient mythological mysteries of this world. We uncovered the final shattered piece of the Mirror of Twilight, and now that we're really nearing the end, it's funny that I find myself feeling so melancholic as the game begins winding down. I tend to write these scripts bit by bit as I play through the game, so at this point I haven't seen the end yet. Well, I mean, I have. Voiceover me has, but me in the past writing the script hasn't. This is a weird thing to put in the script. Okay, sorry, I'm gonna keep going. And at this moment, I actually find myself wishing there was some more episodic style content around Link and Midna's strange adventures in Hyrule. As I reflect, I find that I've had pretty conflicting opinions on Twilight Princess. I first played this game in middle school, I think, and the first 3 dungeons ended up feeling somewhat underwhelming, so that was about as far as I got. Returning to the game, I did have something of the same feeling, especially going into the Water Temple. It just felt like the game was lacking that spark of adventure and curiosity that makes the Zelda series so exciting and engaging. But in the second half, it's really turned around. I love all the little details in the development of Midna's character, down to how her voice becomes softer and less harsh as she opens up to you. Midna as a companion is so fleshed out and complex, and her contrasting perspectives and opinions with Link make her commentary all the more charming and enjoyable. I like the unique horror conspiracy vibe this game has going for it, especially in the latter half when it jumps into this sort of monster of the week style structure. I have such a soft spot for goofy, episodic slice of life style content, and the establishment of Link and Midna as some weird cryptozoologist duo heading out from his secret headquarters in Telma's bar is just so comfy and enjoyable. Twilight Princess is a game of contrasts, and the good and the bad together tell the story of an ambitious title which perhaps got a bit lost in its own legacy and expectation, but that was always guided by an incredible sense of spirit and heart. These moments are really elevated into something special by Midna's presence, and this game especially underscores the redemptive significance of giving Link a compelling, likable companion to tag along with. And as we head back to the Arbiter's ground and assemble the mirror, these final moments explore those complex emotions which swirl at the center of this game. Standing on the precipice of the Twilight Realm, Midna reflects on the beauty of Twilight and the gentle nature of its existence. And it's a bit heartbreaking that this comes across as almost a sort of plea, that she wants at least Link to understand that Twilight and Shadow are not inherently evil or wrong. We know this beauty in the splash of color seen at twilight, as the sun sets and night begins, reflecting the words spoken by Russell at the start of the game. This gentle light once bathed the Twilight Realm and comforted its tormented, banished residents, who were held in a potential unstable state of coexistence. This all changed when Zant took control, ousting Midna and transforming her into the form of an imp, before turning the people of the Twilight Realm towards darkness. Midna confesses that she was initially consumed by a sort of darkness herself, noticing Link's resemblance to the hero of legend and wanting to manipulate him to fit her needs. She had no desire to protect the world of light, driven by centuries of resentment for the banishment of her people, and was indeed manipulating Link due to his resemblance to a fabled hero in their legends. But over time, she grew to understand that something universal connects the people of these parallel lands, something fundamental and essential which unites their divided existence. And in so doing, by expressing an understanding of the inherent dignity of life beyond superficial divides, she at last epitomizes that fundamental leadership ideal which qualifies her acknowledgement by the sages as the Twilight Princess. Midna was once the ruler of this realm, and as we approach these somber-looking shadow beasts standing aimlessly in the plaza, she asks us not to fight them. The design of the Twilight Realm is striking, with an eerie, almost demonic landscape dotted by bizarre shadow creatures with unnatural proportions. In the end, Twilight Princess never really committed to the premise of horror, and even here at the climax, there's nothing overtly scary. But somehow these awkward silhouettes of twisted creatures capture this captivating sensation of fear. This seems like the sort of thing you might see out of the corner of your eye in a dark woods, a predator looming in the distance. It's like paranoia embodied. The bizarre coloring and dramatic architecture of the backdrop almost resembles a sort of Renaissance-era painting depiction of hell. This place truly feels like the shadow of Hyrule. In the world of light, as Zelda mentioned before, light and darkness are sequential, rhythmic. They cycle such that one replaces the other over and over across time. In fact, this cycling duality may actually be time. And as a result, the people of this world tend to pick sides or fall in line according to teams, with one opposed against the other. Human nature tends such that contrast leads to discrimination and thus to violence. Midna describes the light of the Twilight Realm as gentle because it embodies both the light and dark simultaneously, which I know sounds like a contradiction. Something cannot be its opposite, at least from our perspective, but if it could, it seems that instantaneous moment of meditative ascendancy would be gentle, colorful, and somehow also deeply sad. The world held perpetually in the simultaneous coexistence of opposing extremes would eventually lose all sense of distinction and purpose. Zant capitalized on this unsteady peace, rousing the citizens of the Twilight from their sort of metaphysical imprisonment in non-potential space by pulling them towards darkness. Not the shadow, but the dark, the erasure of the world of light, and by extension the Twilight Realm as well. We counter this darkness by recovering the soul, which Midna explains to be the source of the light in this realm, a bit like our own sun. It's held by a massive hand in this futuristic-looking chamber, guarded by a bizarre hologram of Zant which summons monsters to attack us. Again, the symbolism of duality and handedness is reinforced, implying something deeply human about the construction of reality, or perhaps simply our perception of it, as we run back out of the temple carrying the soul while avoiding the hand chasing after us. It's a bit absurd that the soul, the source of all light in the realm, is just this tiny little sphere. It gives the impression that this place doesn't run on the same sort of logic that we're used to, that instead artifacts and symbolism and ideas have more power than scientific reality here. Exposure to the soul restores the citizens to their true forms, and then we dash off to the other side of the temple to do the same there. And it's a bit surprising to see that the other side also just has another soul, and that it's also guarded by a right hand. This might just be for gameplay purposes, honestly, to give the dungeon some symmetry, but I think it also implies the extent to which the Twilight Realm has been unbalanced and disturbed beyond its delicate balance of coexistence. Recovering both of the soul imbues the Master Sword with the power of light, and armed with this awakening, we can banish the clouds of darkness blanketing the area and gain access to the central chamber. After climbing our way up the central tower, we eventually find ourselves ready to take on the final challenge to... Oh, wait, just kidding, I missed the boss key again. I don't know how I feel about Twilight Princess being clever and hiding the boss keys in little tucked away corners of the dungeon. I actually did check behind this darkness waterfall the first time through, but ended up missing the claw shot targets overhead. In previous games, the boss keys, or big keys, or whatever they're called, were distributed in a very obvious and directed manner. You would often find the chest after a pivotal puzzle or encounter, and it would play a key role in pacing, signaling to you that events were rising to a climax, and you were generally about to battle through the culmination of whatever puzzle or challenge theme you had been exploring throughout the dungeon. In Twilight Princess, it isn't uncommon to end up at the boss door just to find you have no way to get inside. In fact, I think it's somewhat expected in most of these dungeons, especially here, because this big central chamber even has a shortcut to help you get back up if you need to leave. Okay, so on the one hand, I like that this dynamic gives you more of a reason to pay attention to your compass. The tension that builds behind your anticipation of the boss door is more palpable when it feels like you've been locked out. And exploring around for a key to uncover the dark cryptid hidden at the center of the dungeon is certainly in fitting with the themes of the game. But like, on the other hand, it's really annoying. Okay, time for our showdown with Zant. Link and Midna have grown much stronger together since their earlier encounter at Lake Ilia, driven by Zant's callous decision to torture them rather than finish them off. But as Midna tries to rub it in his face, he instead calmly reprimands her. Still your tongue, he says, and I will tell you of both magic and the oppression of ages. He reveals his face at last, and man, what is going on with that haircut? Okay, I'm sorry, go ahead. He explains that being locked in the shadow of Hyrule, in a land beyond time where night and day are one, robbed the Twilight of any sense of ambition or desire, effectively neutralizing the threat they posed to existence but oppressing what was a genuine talent for and understanding of magic. Zant twists himself up into knots describing the royal family of the Twilight, the leadership structure which emerged here in the shadows, implicating their inaction and subjecting their people to what he calls a miserable half-existence. And then he just straight up loses it. And I kinda get it. I have mixed feelings on this direction for Zant. The purpose of this scene is to show Zant as a petulant child, frustrated by his own ambitions, desperate to claim power by any means necessary to exercise his own worldview and enforce it upon others. He has a religious, dogmatic fervor which drives his actions, and the ominous reveal of his radicalization at the hands of Ganondorf is interesting. Zant isn't really the cool, imposing figure he appeared to be under his mask. He's actually kind of an awkward dork with a weird haircut, goofy mannerisms, and an inflated sense of ego and worth. In all his selfish intelligence and jealousy towards the royal family, he has grown to think that he could do better, that he would be willing to make the hard choices to correct centuries of perceived oppression and injustice. And I wouldn't say he's necessarily wrong here, at least not entirely. I think this is compelling stuff. Despite being a Twilight, Zant is a deeply human and relatable villain. A normal person who was so outraged by his own inability to affect change in the world that he turned to evil, to destruction, deciding that if he cannot play the game like the royal family, he may as well get rid of it. Despite these ambitions, Zant is a sycophant, easily impressed by power and bound to its influence despite his supposed sense of self-worth. And his ultimate motivation, that which aligns with his Dark Lord Ganondorf, is to merge shadow and light to create darkness. This is such an interesting idea. It's like the antithesis to the notion of the Twilight Realm. So let's dig into it a little bit as we face off with Zant. The fight here is a bit of a riff on the boss rush concept from Wind Waker, which is a gaming trope I honestly kind of hate, but at least this time there's a little spin put into each different scenario. It's kind of nice to revisit our adventure like this, I guess, and the subtle differences in the way you use each key item along with Zant's mannerisms make it an entertaining gauntlet. Anyway, I think the game has been driving home that the central premise of the Twilight Realm is its ability to embody two extremes simultaneously, rather than cycling through them like in the World of Light. I might have mentioned this in an earlier video, but a lot of the symbolism can be captured in the visual of the yin-yang, a famous representation of the binary structure of reality. The swirling aspect of this design indicates the ongoing cycles of light and dark, while the smaller dots illustrate nuance, light in the darkness, dark in the light. Something kind of interesting is that if you spin a yin-yang symbol really fast, it doesn't actually blur into gray. Rather, it appears to blink, flashing both black and white, and as it goes faster and faster, the two almost seem to coexist. We saw a similar idea represented with the colors red and blue at the center of the universe in Mario Galaxy, where the two colors spun together but did not blend. The Twilight Realm is the infinite asymptote of that spinning symbol, a coexistence of opposing extremes. And there's an incredible beauty to this sort of harmony, an ascended enlightenment and peace, but for a people so ambitious and focused as the Twilight, the lack of distinction, of the necessity for effort or the passage of time, must have felt like an unbearable imprisonment. Ganondorf influence here pushed Zant towards a darker ambition, to blend together the light and shadow, to erase the line of distinction and extinguish that incredible potential of the universe. I don't know if we'll ever do a Dark Souls video on this channel, maybe someday after we get through the Zelda series, but these ideas are conveyed similarly in the intro to that game. In the notion that before the spark of humanity created a religious structure to reality through the establishment of disparity, of binary, the world was gray and timeless. There was no shadow because there was no light. All potential was eliminated from reality, and the only existence was that of timeless beings such as dragons and arch trees, symbols of eternity and stagnation. Ganondorf wants to destroy reality because he has been burned for too long by an unfair structure built off the logic of disparity, by which the prospering of the Kingdom of Hyrule exists at the expense of his own people suffering and starving in the desert. And Zant becomes a useful tool for him in fulfilling this ambition, a pathetic little pawn with a strong intellect but a weak mind, a perfect plaything for a man defined by the power of his will. But all that said, I just feel like the game goes too far here. Once Zant takes off that mask, it feels like the game designers bent over backwards to make him appear weak and pathetic. This imposing, unknowable entity which heralded the end of the world, who cast aside the power of the fused shadow with a flick of his wrist, turns into a goofy little guy that scrambles around gibbering when you whack him in the shins with the ball and chain. I just don't think a narrative should treat its characters like this, even the sniveling and pathetic ones. Zant deserved a bit more dignity here. Now, I don't think that his thought process can't be exposed or that the flaws in his character can't be brought to light. Honestly, if you take out this entire fight and just leave in the cutscene that follows, I feel it's a much better ending to the tale of this character. Midna recovers the fused shadow, incorporating its power into herself. Zant reveals his face, showing a pathetic, open-mouthed reverence to his god Ganondorf, mocking the futility of our actions and ever trying to oppose a chosen one such as himself. And then, Midna's power overflows and pops him like a balloon. It's pathetic, anticlimactic. It exposes the holes in his expression of belief and his lack of individual will, but it doesn't destroy his calm, stoic sensibility. It doesn't turn him into a punching bag and a laughingstock. I get that killing Zant in a cutscene would probably go over pretty horribly, but I think this cutscene is perfect. It strikes just the right balance of goofiness and body horror with his cut lips and bizarrely extending neck, the look of blank devotion and reverence in his lifeless eyes, that horrific reflex of terror as his arms and legs twitch before he explodes, the exposure of the utter futility of his pathetic belief system and his abandonment of the traditions of the Twilight. It makes Zant real. I just wish Nintendo had committed to the anticlimax here. Made Midna the hero of this side of the story, taking her own actions beyond Link's direct control. Having regained the full power of the fused shadow and returning to the world of light, we make our way back to the castle town, moving quickly through the quiet streets in the dark of night. Upon arriving at the barrier surrounding Hyrule Castle, Midna summons forth the fused shadow, the pieces of the puzzle slotting together in an overwhelming expression of power that she seems barely able to control. What emerges is a gigantic spider-like being, oddly reminiscent of a guardian actually, but with each leg possessing a hand, demonstrating the cursed binary breaking capability of this monstrous form. It summons forth a spear of light, its stony form trembling and separating in an apparent silent scream of anguish before shattering the barrier. A quiet rain begins to fall as Link catches Midna, and the two look up together at their final shared objective. It seems this barrier indicated the proceedings of a sort of ritual, and Midna believes that this is Ganondorf's means of returning to the world of light. Although we now possess the power to restore Zelda, she may be in even greater danger inside the castle. So, sneaking in past the gate, we reunite with the ancient spirit of the hero one final time, learning his ultimate technique. So I didn't show all of them, but this is the 7th of these techniques we've learned so far, and I just really enjoyed their addition to the game. It was always exciting to find a new whistling stone, to wonder at what new technique could be waiting, to slowly gain glimpses into the hidden motivation and personality of the withdrawn hero's shade, earning his respect over the course of our adventures. Twilight Princess really excels at these little moments of interaction between characters, in exploring how their understanding of one another changes over time and building on this consistently over the course of the game. It really resonates at this point how far we've come, from being scolded for our lack of courage to learning the final hidden skill, the Great Spin. And we hear the Shade's final message. Although I accepted life as the hero, I could not convey the lessons of that life to those who came after. At last, I have eased my regrets. You who now gaze to the future with vision unclouded, surely you can restore Hyrule to its stature of yore as a chosen land of the gods. Go, and do not falter, my child. Hyrule Castle is a large, foreboding fortress containing expansive indoor and outdoor sections swarming with monsters. I love the atmosphere here, the sound of rain, your quiet companion as you battle through massive set pieces against overwhelming hordes of enemies, giving you a chance to express the skills which have been passed down from the hero's shade. More than anything, this moment feels like a proper send-off to the Link from Ocarina of Time, whose story has always felt so darkly unfinished. That is, if you take the hero's shade to be the spirit of the hero of time. If you do, we can extrapolate backwards to piece together what became of him after the events of Majora's Mask. I accepted life as the hero, he says, which is an interesting choice of words. In Ocarina of Time, Link was eager to become a hero, which ended up being his greatest weakness, and in Majora's Mask, he ran from that responsibility, leaving behind the Master Sword and exiling himself from the kingdom. However, despite his isolation and despair, Link never stopped doing the right thing. Although he hid his face behind a series of different masks, his heroic efforts going for the most part unnoticed, erased from time, or attributed to someone else, Link never stopped trying to do good. His heart was always aligned with the light. The events of Majora's Mask taught Link to forgive himself for his mistakes, but also, more importantly, to forgive Navi, the embodiment of his heroic aim and his guiding light. And in doing so, he regained his sense of self, fighting his way through the Lost Woods and returning home. He likely continued to act as a hero throughout Hyrule, settling down and having a family on the outskirts of the kingdom within what would eventually become Ordon Village. But there's still tragedy in his words, in his acknowledgement of his descendants' ability to gaze into the future with vision unclouded, implying that he never really moved on from his separation with Navi, never stopped looking into the past. Could it be that he found his end somewhere in the Lost Woods, searching for her, unable to move on with his life despite his new family? That he was never able to pass on his skills implied that he died while his own children were quite young. The idea that he still might have been unsatisfied in life, still out there searching for that lost heroic spark, losing the chance to be happy with his family, it's a bit unsettling, honestly, but at least we feel the ease in his regret as he tells us to go forward in his place, calling us his child. Sorry to talk so much about totally different Zelda games in the middle of the Twilight Princess review, but I just love the way Nintendo builds on the story of the hero of time with little hints and references over the course of several games generations removed. It's genuinely such a compelling and unique way of revealing a story, intertwining the fate of the protagonist to their biggest legacy-defining game with its various sequels in a way that feels consistent and coherent, a thematic through-line of character exploration which grounds these other versions of Link to the shadow of their predecessor. My dissatisfaction with the ending to the Ocarina of Time is a big part of why I wanted to try making these videos in the first place. I grew up with Ocarina of Time, and it was a pretty foundational part of my childhood. It made me want to be a hero too, to go off on a grand adventure, to rescue a princess, to save the world. And later on in life, I related to the idea of that naive desire for heroism leading you down the wrong path, wasting years of your life and turning you towards the abyss, spiraling your world into darkness. I think a part of me really wanted to believe that hidden somewhere in one of these games, there would be some confirmation that Link really did find Navi again. In a sort of meta way, the whole reason I played Majora's Mask was to look for little clues about Navi's fate, but even there isn't really anything to find. The message instead seems to be that it's okay to go home without her, to start over and begin your life again. That even without a guiding fairy, you can still find your way in the woods. Wind Waker was an exploration of legacy, an acknowledgement that no heroic effort is ever truly wasted, that we live beyond our actions. And Twilight Princess to me reads as a warning. A message against pining for what once was, to looking into the past and being so desperate to fix your own mistakes that you forget to live for the present, to enjoy the connections you share with people now and look towards the future. The Shade says that his greatest regret was not being able to pass on his skills, but I think it goes deeper than that. Obviously, a lot of this is just based on feeling and me coming up with random fanfiction, but if I imagine a scenario where he meets his end in the woods searching for Navi, his last thoughts turning towards the family he left behind and his endless obsession, it just all kind of fits with the depiction we're shown of his lingering regret here. It wasn't just about the skills being forgotten, it was about the loss of the time he would have spent with his children teaching them. I thought it was kind of strange at first, how he calls Link his child, despite them being separated by generations, but through this frame it makes a lot of sense. It's funny, I didn't even really like Navi all that much as a kid. I actually thought she was kind of annoying, and it was only when I beat the game several years later and watched that final cutscene that I really felt the melancholy of her wordless departure. I think a lot of people can relate to that loss, to the clouding of that vision and focus we once had as children, when we could confidently answer, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" without a moment's hesitation. It's a precious, fleeting spark, and once it's gone, it's gone. But a piece of it does live on, even if it isn't quite as clear. It lives on in our memories and in our hearts, and when we interact with others, acting as mentors or teachers or parents, that spark can light up the hearts of others too. I think that Twilight Princess taught me to accept that, even if it feels like an unsatisfying end to the story, because the alternative is worse, that you spend your life missing the people right in front of you, gazing into the past and ignoring those who care about you and who need you. Okay, anyway, I guess this is basically my apology message for my first video being so clickbaity, but we finally got there 4 videos later. Alright, let's get back to the task at hand. I really quite like the Hyrule Castle section of this game, but there's something about the implementation of Ganondorf here that just feels really sloppy and disorganized to me. When we at last arrive in the throne room, we find him seated there, holding Zelda captive in the center of the Triforce. "Welcome to my castle," he says, but it's not right. I don't really have a problem with the switch of Zant for Ganondorf at the last moment. I actually think in a certain way it's kind of brilliant. I love the idea of Ganondorf as this ultimate embodiment of evil and darkness. So twisted and malicious that it breaks the scale of even an unknowable reality such as the Twilight Realm. It contrasts well with Midna's shadowy edge and Link's bright earnestness, uniting them against a greater opposing force. There's some yin and yang symbolism that I think is pretty important, the idea of a trinity emerging from duality, which we'll return to in a bit. But the problem I have with Ganondorf here is that he shouldn't want the throne. Zant mentioned that Ganondorf wanted to combine light and shadow to create darkness, to erase the cruel and balanced cycle of existence. And it was fitting, it was unique and interesting. We've seen the vengeful conqueror version of Ganondorf in Ocarina of Time, who exacted his will on the land through his dark reign, and we've seen the desperate, fading legacy of an ancient Ganondorf who is desperate to restore Hyrule, and reignite the drama which emerges from that narrative of good against evil. The idea of a Ganondorf driven mad by injustice, sentenced to an incomprehensible, illogical, timeless realm, who lost his form and became a miasma of pure hatred and evil, was so fascinating. But he doesn't embody those ideals here. This form of Ganondorf should want to burn this world to the ground. He even carries the blade which gave him that execution scar, a mockery of the supposed order and justice of the royal family, turning its edge to guide his surgical excision of the world of light, melding it with the shadow piece by piece. But then, he professes his desire to be king. Midna and Link move together to deny him, and he seems to find some amusement in the idea of light and shadow cooperating, wanting to test the true nature of their bond. Ganondorf believes that these are incompatible ideals, that linking the light and shadow will always result in conflict and strife. In emphasizing this point, he takes control of Zelda, another counterpart of Link's, turning him against his fated pairing in a sort of mockery. This is good stuff, mostly, but it feels weird, like we're jumping between different visions to the ending of this game. Defeating Zelda in tennis frees her from Ganondorf's control, and he manifests himself in boar form, dashing mindlessly as an aimless beast. And I don't know, it doesn't really hit right. I feel like we're missing something. This version of Ganondorf doesn't feel developed enough, maybe. It's hard to really feel his rage because so much of his characterization is leaning heavily on events of previous games. The scar on his chest is a step in the right direction, but I don't know, I just really wanted more here. Plus, I don't really know what to think about the fact that Midna needs to jump out and explain to you how to stop his charge in the second half of the fight. It's incredibly unintuitive, even if I do kind of like the connection to Link stopping runaway goats at the beginning of the game. I call back to his own heroic style and ideals. Zelda is restored and it seems that all is well. After all, this is usually Ganondorf's final form. But suddenly his evil will remanifests, appearing in the vision of a god, prompting Midna to recombine the fused shadow and teleport Link and Zelda away. It seems like a foolish self-sacrifice at first. Surely Link and Zelda could be of help, but there's a deep tragedy to her decision-making here that goes beyond simply not wanting to harm them in her transformed state. Out beyond the castle, Ganondorf suddenly appears before us, mounted on a dark horse, posing in an inversion of Link's triumphant awakening as a hero, having easily defeated Midna. This second half of the confrontation with Ganondorf works a lot more for me, as Zelda summons forth the power of light, which defines the sacred structure of this world, manifesting the light arrows and entreating Link's help. We don't get a lot of shared moments between Link and Zelda in this game, but when she bows her head in a pleading expression of regret, and he extends his hand to her as an equal, it serves as a perfect embodiment of both of their characters simultaneously. I also really like that Link's connection with Epona serves such a key role in these final moments of the game, and dashing after Ganondorf with Zelda riding beside you against a glowing backdrop of gathering twilight is empowering and exciting. There's a sort of understated emptiness to this landscape that feels oddly fitting, as if this confrontation has escaped the weighty structure and legacy of Hyrule Castle and spilled over into something rough, human, and simple. A desperate, dirty fight for survival. Will you hear my desire, he asks, holding the execution blade in hand, to take this foul blade and use it to blot out the light forever. The drums play as his title slides on screen, Dark Lord Ganondorf. It's great, it gives me chills. I love the execution of this moment. It finally fits with my expected motivation for the character. In these final moments, these two do battle over opposing viewpoints as to the nature of duality, of yin and yang. In Chinese philosophy, the symbol of the yin and yang represents a fundamental cycle of creation and destruction. This is what the white and black represent at their most basic essence. These elements have been extrapolated out by association to include concepts such as masculine and feminine, light and dark, good and evil. I think you could even extend them further to cover every comprehensible duality. Although the exact association of yin and yang to something like heavy and light or sharp and dull is a bit more of like a mental stretch. Reality is constructed out of stacked derivative binaries, all harkening back to a fundamental ideal. The laws of physics tell us that it is impossible to create or destroy matter or energy. This is the most foundational law from which emerges the fundamental logical structure of our reality. And it explains why creation and destruction can be complementary to each other, rather than simply opposites, because they're both playing in the same sandbox, just rearranging the materials. Thus, light and shadow can coexist. In fact, they must exist together by definition, even if that coexistence is cyclical rather than simultaneous. Ganondorf, growing up in the shadow of the great kingdom of Hyrule, grew to resent this conservative structure of reality. In Ocarina of Time, he aimed to spin the wheel, to exact vengeance and relish his time on top, but he was undermined by his inability to lead. In Twilight Princess, he was stopped before he ever had a chance to enact his revenge, so he lost his belief in even the capability of the cycle itself. Now he desires darkness, achieved through blending of light and shadow, of yin and yang, of breaking down the barriers of reality and blending it all to nothing. With the final jumping strike, Link drives the Master Sword through Ganondorf's execution wound, carrying forward the first technique taught to him by the hero's shade as the Lord of Darkness meets his death out in a quiet field alone. With the last of his strength, he struggles to his feet, sword still planted in his chest, and says, "Do not think that this ends here. The history of light and shadow will be written in blood." Before his aspect of the Triforce fades, and with it, Zant's own adoration. Twilight Princess is a messy game. It's a game of contrasts, of extremes, and I guess in a way that's fitting. It attempts to tell a very ambitious story, one about the metaphysical structure of reality, of the nature of light and shadow, of how opposites can also be complementary. Like two sides of the same coin, one needing the other in order to exist. And from this duality, another can emerge, that of creation and destruction against non existence. And in this way, the storytelling gets a bit confused. Maybe this is partially localization, but I think even the game itself is fairly inconsistent on its use of twilight, shadow, and darkness as terminology. The Twilight Realm is a realm of simultaneously existing extremes. It represents the moment of sunset when day becomes night, and yet it's presented as the shadow world to the world of light. Its mechanics are inconsistent or poorly explained, like how did Ganondorf or Zant escape the Twilight Realm? Why is the Twilight in the world of light different from the Twilight Realm? Why does the Twilight form when light is taken away from the world of light? But generally, I'm okay with all of this because the emotional heart at the center of this story and its most redeeming element is Link's relationship with Midna. Link has always had companions on his journeys, each with their own unique personalities and goals, but Midna's character feels like a huge step forward for the series in this regard. Writing for companion characters is always a careful balance, and in Wind Waker especially, I think the designers wanted for the King of Red Lions to mostly operate in the background. But Midna's heavy involvement in the story here really does a lot to endear me to this game, perhaps more so than any other title so far. I love her contrast to Link, her sinister, snarky attitude, the secrecy of her own tragic history, the ambiguous nature of her personal goals and ambitions. The dynamic of their relationship, which emerges over the course of the game from transactional manipulation to genuine trust and understanding, opening up to one another and learning to work together, is such a powerful emotional through line. And it's shown not just in text, but in all sorts of subtle details, from body language and cutscenes, to her desire to hide in your shadow even after regaining her form, to the way her speech patterns change slowly over the course of the game, becoming gentler and less harsh. And once you've earned that trust, getting to journey across Hyrule with Midna in the second half, uncovering all sorts of weird and wacky cryptic creatures along the way, it was a journey I never wanted to end. More than any other Zelda game, Twilight Princess felt like going on an adventure with a friend, and as it draws to a close, I have this lingering sense of melancholy that I never really felt with the other titles. A sense of sadness at the twilight of a grand adventure, like Russell had mentioned at the start of the game. A wish that the journey could have been just a little longer. Even if the execution was sloppy, if some dungeons felt extraneous, if the story felt at times contradictory or inconsistent, at least for me, all of this can be redeemed by that sense of interconnected camaraderie that certain games capture so incredibly well. And so my thoughts return to Russell's question from the start of the game. Why does watching a sunset feel so sad, as it spills a splash of color across the clouds overhead? Where does the color come from, if our world is built out of light and shadow, white and black? Well, in truth, all that color is contained in light itself. When light shines directly on us, we are unable to make out the rainbow of elements which fuse to create its fundamental nature, but at sunset, when the sun needs to travel further through the atmosphere to reach our eyes, the effect of occlusion, of shadows from particles in the atmosphere, split the light apart into vibrant colors. In this way, the beautiful color splash of the setting sun is the spilled blood of light intermingling with shadow, the shadow strangling the life out of day as night approaches. This isn't a simultaneous embodiment of extremes, a blinking of black and white. Rather, this is the result of opposing extremes blending together, of the logical structure of a reality breaking down, and to us it looks like incomprehensible beauty. But the beauty comes from its fleeting nature. Link and Midna are complementary elements, light and shadow aligned with a similar purpose, and when they grow to fully trust one another, that's where the game really comes alive for me. These little adventures with Midna were so colorful and fun, so packed with personality and life, and as we look back on them now, it hits this tone inside me that's hard to describe. An idea that even though it was fleeting and flawed, I'm glad that it happened. At the end of the game, the children of Ordon Village return home and Russell and Uli's baby is born, fulfilling Link's duty from the beginning. Link's expression of courage has always been in bridging the impossible gaps between people, bringing together the citizens of Hyrule and erasing years of doubt through an earnest, courageous attitude of openness and empathy. But here, at the end of the game, that courage fails. Light and shadow can't mix, says Midna, but never forget that there's another world bound to this one. Zelda expresses her understanding that light and shadow are two sides of the same coin, that one cannot exist without the other. But then she goes on to explain her understanding of why the Mirror of Twilight was left in this world. And she explains it as a desire held by the goddesses for these worlds to meet, expressing a sadly naive understanding of the history of Hyrule. Midna expressed earlier in the game that Zelda is kind-hearted but lacks experience, and in these final moments she fails to live up to the nature of her aspect of the Triforce, fails to manifest the wisdom needed to reach Midna's heart. Her expression here seems to convey a tragic disappointment which she brushes aside. If all in Hyrule are like you, she says, then maybe you'll do alright. Twilight Princess is a game about trust. And here, in these final moments, that trust which emerged from Link's courageous spirit, which forged bonds between the Hylians, the Gorons, the Zora, it fails. Midna's final words to Link go unspoken as she shatters the Mirror of Twilight, proving her worthiness as the leader of the Twilight and severing their bonds to the world of light. And then she's gone forever. Ultimately, Link, Zelda, and Ganondorf all fail to embody their aspects of the Triforce. Ganondorf's power fails him in his final moments, succumbing to his injuries and losing the support of the Bulblin leader. But more than that, he loses the power of his conviction, falling prey to the pedestrian temptations of glory and ambition. Zelda fails to manifest the wisdom necessary to understand the true nature of the Mirror of Twilight. The mirror was never made with honest intentions, as evidenced by the dark, corrupting nature of its shattered fragments. The Twilight were exiled to the Twilight Realm, and the mirror remained in the world of light, giving all the power over its use to one side. The goddesses probably intended for it to be used the way it was by the royal family for centuries, as a means of disposing unsavory elements of dark and cleansing the world of light toward a fully realized order, of corrupting the gentle light of twilight into a prison of darkness and despair. If you really think about the conditions for destroying the mirror, the darkness of that intent becomes even more clear. If the dark, evil denizens of the Twilight Realm could get it together enough to construct their own society, to establish their own order and morality and designate a proper leadership, they could only be freed from their servitude to the world of light by the self-sacrifice of that leader to the other side. Midna was only able to pull off her escape by the sacrificial magic of Zelda stabilizing her in this world. Any other leaders who came through would be almost immediately incapacitated and probably die before shattering the mirror, simply fueling the distrust and hatred between realms as the Twilight was thrust back into chaos. In this way, the supposed arrangement seems more like a cruel joke, designating the unending punishment of the Twilight and their ancestors. And finally, Link's courage, his incredible ability to form bonds with others. It seems that the trust he built with Midna would have been enough to overcome this divide between light and shadow, but fundamentally, it wasn't. I think the reason Midna stayed behind to fight Ganon alone wasn't just because of her concern for Link and Zelda, but because she wanted to see if the power of the fused shadow was enough to overcome him. She feared that even if she could trust Link individually, some other resident of the world of light might rise to power in the same way as Ganondorf. And when she was so easily defeated, she knew that even the greatest magic of the Twilight wouldn't be enough to protect her people. Maybe if Link and Zelda had answered differently, had inspired courage in her to believe in the Triforce, and the redeeming nature of the cycles of good and evil which define the narrative reality of the world of light, things could have been different. But instead, that trust falters and the bond between worlds is destroyed. And honestly, maybe this is how it always would have been. Link and Midna had fun together. They grew to understand one another. There was a magic and a color to their interactions that felt so incredibly vibrant and comfortable. But the sunset is so striking because it only lasts a moment. If we were to erase the bond between light and shadow forever, our lives would fall apart. Perhaps it's better to experience that lingering sadness, to live in the melancholy of the fleeting moment, than to feel nothing at all. And that, I think, is what Twilight Princess is all about. Hey, hello. Thanks for watching my Twilight Princess video. Next up is Skyward Sword. And man, it was kind of hard to find like the original trailer for this game. I had to go to the IGN YouTube page. It's so old. I didn't even realize. I guess they've remade this now, and it's like an HD version on the Switch. So we'll probably play the Switch version. So like the footage doesn't look like this, but oh my gosh, Skyward Sword. This is an intimidating video. I've kind of like been procrastinating on like starting it because I have conflicted feelings. On the one hand, this has got to be like the most controversial Zelda game, right? Like it's definitely got a lot of flaws and there's some issues with it, and it like overemphasizes some things that it probably shouldn't. But on the other side of it, this is my favorite game. Like not just favorite Zelda game, this is my favorite game ever. I just love the atmosphere and the characters and like the motion control and the Skyward Sword. That trailer's a lot shorter than I remember it being. But remember how hype it was when it was like, oh, that trailer music was actually Zelda's Lullaby in reverse. It's so cool. And then the rest of the music in the game wasn't like that good in comparison. It was kind of disappointing, actually. You didn't really learn any cool songs on the harp, but you could go down to the little pumpkin cafe and like perform. It was so sweet. And you like live in a dorm and you have a roommate buddy who you help get super swole. I love this game. It's so good. Well, you gotta play it. You gotta see if the HD version's any good. I'm gonna play it with the nunchucks in each hand, standing up, swinging my hand to the TV still. You gotta do it. This is the way you gotta play. All right. Well, I'll get started on that, and then I'll see you in. I said 2 months last time and turned to 3 months, so I'll say 3 months this time, and then it'll turn into 4 months. All right. Goodbye. Thanks for watching. See you next time.